Is it? Oh wow, maybe Disneyland.
We're going to go ahead and get started. If folks could take their seat, please. I'm going to go ahead and call this July 2nd, 2018 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. I wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight to participate in their local government and, more importantly, to wish everyone a happy 4th of July holiday. We will start with our Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Dow Powell to lead us this evening. Thank you, Dow. We'll move on to our communications from the public, and this is time set aside for you to bring to the attention of the council anything that's on your mind. If you are here to speak in regards to the two public hearings that we have scheduled under items 6A and 6B, please hold off on commenting until I call for that individual public hearing. So anything you'd like to share with the council, now would be your opportunity. For the record, name and address when you approach the podium. Ma'am.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Tessa Pittman, and I live on 505 Dakota Avenue. And I'm here tonight just to have a concern about the speed and traffic on Dakota Avenue. I have reached out to several people already, including Andy Fury via email. I'll lay everything just today. The police department and then city and public works, just leaving messages to hopefully, again, voice concerns. And then to be exhaustive was encouraged to attend this meeting tonight and just speak up. So I live specifically across from Bay Point Drive. My husband and I, he's a Whitefish native, and two young children built there about 5 years ago. And we are just noticing the traffic is it's just way too fast. And where we live, if you're familiar with Dakota, live on the bottom. Skiles Avenue is the intersection, and then there's that lovely speed hill. And so people really pick up speed and then just cruise along. The neighbors and I kind of joke it's kind of like a luge. And we get to see how fast that traffic is. So far, our neighbors 2 doors north of us had a dog that was killed in a hit and run. Our neighbor to the south just buried a fawn in a hit and run as well. So there's small children. I think we can all think the worst case scenario, so we just want to be proactive. So due diligence, looking at Dakota, there's very few speed limit signs. So specifically going north from Edgewood to Glenwood, there are 2 traffic signs. One when you turned onto Edgewood onto Dakota, there's one there. And then the next one is after the intersection of Skiles and Dakota. Now, if you travel south, there are several from the intersection of Skiles and Dakota to Edgewood, all on every block for 15 miles an hour. So our hope would be to make it a consistent speed limit. And it's kind of tough on that area between Skiles and Edgewood. If you're going north, it's 25 miles an hour. If you're going south, it's 15. So we would really appreciate some more signs, speed limit signs being put up. We'd appreciate a consistent speed limit be posted. There are also signs, big yellow signs, children at play. That would be excellent. I mean, I could put up a sign, I could buy a sign, but I think, and our neighbors up the street have little kids and trikes out, and they've put up signs, but I think at this point, our efforts really want the city to approve something and then to help enforce it. Yeah, so that would be, and then just in terms of just extra speed limit signs, just having, I don't know if it's even worth putting up some of those flashing, or one of those flashing things to help people realize how fast they are going and kind of learn the speed limit, what it looks like to drive 15 miles an hour down that. And then just as a last thing, it would, those roads are not marked, and from Marina Crest to Glenwood, there is no sidewalk. And if you go down Glenwood, there is no speed limit sign. And there is a church and a preschool that my son actually attends. Bikes there. There's no sidewalk, but it'd be great to put a bike path. I mean, this is such a recreational community. This is peak tourism season. It just would be great to have that well marked to keep everybody safe. So anything we can do in our neighborhood, please let us know. I've reached out. I think my contact information's out there. And yeah, I just would appreciate getting some signs up ASAP. Thanks.
Thanks, Tessa.
Hi, my name is Pam Spar. I'm at 511 Dakota Avenue. I'm actually neighbors with Tessa, and I want to express the same concerns that Tessa has expressed regarding the traffic, the volume of traffic, and the speed of the traffic. And again, in the summertime, it only gets worse. And people seem to treat our street, although it parallels Wisconsin, they treat it like a Wisconsin light. They think that just because I'm paralleling Wisconsin and it seems like a thoroughfare, I'm going to treat it like a thoroughfare. And it's not. It is a residential street. And the good news is, as Tessa was describing, down at the south end towards Edgewood, going south, it's 15 miles an hour posted. Down at our end, it's 25. So the point being, the city has already recognized that this is a residential street, and it has recognized that 15 miles an hour is the proper speed limit. We're asking that 15 miles an hour, that recognition be extended further north to where, as Tessa indicated, down the luge. When you go down the luge, people need to know this is not a thoroughfare. This is a residential street, and it's 15 miles an hour. And the other thing we'd like to see, in recognition of hopefully a change in that speed limit, is something to make drivers aware that the speed limit has changed, whether that be increased patrol or that flashing sign for just some time, where it can be a temporary sign in place, people have an awareness, and we can move on and hopefully have a safe summer in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, 35 4th Street West, P.O. Box 3094, Kalispell, and speaking on behalf of myself tonight, would like to encourage you, when you do schedule your work session on your setting your goals for the upcoming year, and the confusion with the story in the pilot saying that was today. I understand it's going to be in July now. Clarifying that date, I think, is important for public participation. But I would also like to encourage you to post the feedback that you've gotten from staff in terms of goals and the goals that you've looked at in your workshop, so that in preparation for that workshop, the public can come with some either support or additional suggestions, ideas to help you finalize those goals before you. And secondly, I would like to ask, and I did not have time prior to this meeting to do research, but I've been told that the city has a policy that you only will release documents in an Adobe PDF form. And that works for a lot of documents for the city, but I had recently requested an Excel spreadsheet that would have allowed me to sort for data, and well as have it in a readable form. The form that I got it was in a 5-point font for most of it, unreadable and not able to, because there weren't lines, it's basically impossible to track. So if there's a way to review that policy and to look at exceptions for documents like that, it's expensive. I had to pay $34 just to get those copies, and then they're unusable. So I would really like to see that reviewed as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Further public comment tonight? Sir.
I'm Neil Malcasian. I live on Colorado Ave. I have some comments about fireworks. I suppose that's never talked about. I'm not here just to complain. I'm here to discuss what I believe is the major influence that encourages the personal use of fireworks well outside the time period as defined in the city ordinance. That influence being the fireworks stand that is located just south of Highway 40 and 93. Being, of course, outside the city limits, the operator's actions are covered by Flathead County. When that fireworks stand opens on June 24th and continues sales until July 5th, It is a message to the public buyers of fireworks that the season of fireworks use is here. The primary reason I believe that firework ignitions are well in advance of the stated permitted use is that there is no counter to this sense that if the fireworks are up for sale at a major gateway to Whitefish, then it is all right to set them off. This year, on the day that sales started at the fireworks stand, there were fireworks going off on the south end of Colorado Ave. The debris was in the road the next day. One article in the Daily Young Lake is not enough to inform the many visitors who will only spend a few days here and then be gone. My answer to the need to inform the public of exactly what the regulations are is to set up reader boards at the two major entrances to Whitefish, and they should be there prior to the opening of the fireworks stands and remain for the entire time the stands are open, especially for New Year's Eve. The large banners that span the highway on Highway 93, both at the south entrance and at the west entrance, advertising the next event in Whitefish, such as Depot Park activities, could also carry a fireworks use message or could be a separate banner. By more effectively delivering the message regarding the permitted fireworks use period, it should increase the voluntary compliance and therefore reduce the calls to flathead dispatch for violations. For the past several years, it seems like fireworks available to the public have become more powerful, and the use of these fireworks starts well before July 3rd and goes well beyond 10 p.m., extending beyond 11 p.m. frequently. I have looked at the Whitefish website and see no mention of the fireworks ordinance. Today more people depend on the information from the internet. I visited with the operator at the fireworks stand south of Whitefish, and neither he nor his one employee that was present knew exactly what the Whitefish fireworks ordinance stated. In closing, I believe the correct information can be delivered more effectively than what is currently being done. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Can folks hear okay in the audience? Or are you hearing a lot of feedback from the fans, the HVAC system? Turn it off? Yeah. Michelle, do you mind? Or Adam, can you adjust the HVAC system? We'll go ahead and continue with public comment while we wait for the fix to the system. Any further public comment this evening? Not seeing any, we'll stay with the audience. Any volunteer board reports for the council? Volunteer board reports? How about from the council? None this evening. We'll move on to item 5, which is our consent agenda. Any changes or additions to the June 18th minutes, or can I have a motion for approval? Frank?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Seconded by Ryan. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion carries unanimously. Michelle, which brings us on to our 2 public hearings this evening. We will start with item 6A, which is a request by the Whitefish School District for a conditional use permit to construct a new elementary school to be located at 1118 East 7th Street. This will be WCUP 18-07. Wendy.
Good evening. So the applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit to develop an elementary school to the west of the existing elementary school. Access to the new school will be off of East 7th Street at a new entrance directly to the north of Asher Avenue. The existing parking lot will remain as part of the proposal for the grades 1 through 4 drop-off. The new parking lot at the corner of East 7th and Pine Avenue will be used for kindergarten student drop-off, teachers, and guests. The bus parking area will remain at the north side of the school, but will get its own designated bus drive aisle. The existing Muldown Elementary site doesn't have any plans at this current time. Again, the parking lot that's currently there will remain. The building will be decommissioned, and there's some discussion regarding demolition of the older portions of the building as the budget allows, and some of the building may be reused for district facilities. The project obtained 3 variances on June 5th from the Board of Adjustments, including permitting parking in the front yard setback, reducing the overall parking requirement for the school, and alleviating the landscaping screening when a parking lot abuts a residential zoning district. A conditional use permit is required for the project because schools are a conditional use permit in the WR1. So the site's located at 1118 East 7th Street, and the property is almost 6 acres. The site's undeveloped and is zoned WR1. It's surrounded by the high school to the north, residential to the west, the church to the south, and the existing Moldown Elementary to the east. The growth policy designates this property as public, semi-public. Staff noticed adjacent landowners, placed a legal in the paper, and noticed advisory agencies, and we didn't receive any comments on the proposal. The project is reviewed according to the criteria in the conditional use permit criteria under the zoning regulations. The project complies with the growth policy because the proposed use is a public school. The project's meeting the zoning regulations with the exception of the rear yard setback, and staff will recommend a condition of approval that the property line along the east side be adjusted, which they're already starting to work on, to meet the rear yard setback. Under parking, the project would require 200 parking spaces. Currently, there's 81 parking spaces in the existing Moldown parking lot, and they're proposing to add an additional 82 parking spaces for a total of 163 with 36 loading spaces. So, as I mentioned earlier, they did get a variance from the Board of Adjustments to reduce the overall parking requirements, and then also permit parking in the front yard. One of the requirements, Pine Avenue, for some reason, has been all owned by the school district, and so we're having them dedicate that right-of-way, which is bringing the property line closer to the parking, which is then putting the parking in the front yard setback. Which is why they requested the variance to that. The parking screening landscaping requirement is intended to provide screening buffering between a parking lot and incompatible residential districts. But because of security needs for the school and the need to provide clear vision, they requested a variance. So there will still be landscaping between the parking lot and the sidewalk. It's just not going to be the screening and site obscuring type landscaping. The height will be checked at the time of building permit, and lot coverage standards appear to be met, but they'll be confirmed at the time of building permit. The site is suitable for the school because there's no environmental hazards, and access is by an existing street and will meet emergency standards. Parking, traffic, circulation should all function properly. Traffic's going to all enter in off of 7th Street, and then for the new westerly parking lot will be a right out onto Pine Avenue. They're proposing to remove the existing sidewalk along Pine Avenue and replace it with a 10-foot wide asphalt multi-use path, which is similar to what's next to the new greenhouse by the high school. The traffic study indicates the intersections will continue to operate and function within acceptable standards and should remain fairly unchanged from the existing traffic. They will be required to do a stormwater plan because they're obviously exceeding more than 5,000 square feet of impervious area. Again, they did do a traffic study. Intersections will continue to operate at either A or B levels, which is acceptable. They did make some recommendations, include improved channelization for vehicles making left-hand turns, updating the striping at crosswalks, removal of an East 6th Street and Pine Avenue crossing because it doesn't quite jibe with an intersection, and coordinating the crossing guards. The applicant, Public Works, had some concerns that I identified in my staff report. The applicant did address those with a memo that was attached to your packet, and Public Works was satisfied with their responses. Again, it should fit into the neighborhood, and it will be obligated to get architectural review approval, which they've already been to the committee and had a pre-app. The Planning Board held a public hearing on June 21st. The Planning Board recommended unanimously approval, subject to 9 conditions of approval, including our standard condition of approval about kind of a plan showing how they're going to put together their dust abatement and hours in construction, and also to consider some provisions for routing traffic during school hours. The fire marshal must approve the placement and design of all fire hydrants prior to their installation. The Pine Avenue must be dedicated to the city of Whitefish to line up with the right-of-way that was dedicated along with the high school for a full 60 feet. And then we would like to see them continue to coordinate with Public Works with their engineering plans. And then finally, a boundary line adjustment needs to be recorded to ensure the rear yard setbacks being met. can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. We'll start with Frank.
Wendy, I hate to be a curmudgeon. We have no plans to demolish what apparently is a blighted building?
Maybe I'll let the applicant talk
And we
about
have
that.
not, and we've not budgeted to do that?
I couldn't answer that question for you.
Andy.
Wendy, on the third variance that the Board of Adjustments granted to alleviate the parking lot screening requirement, I'm assuming that was for a visibility/safety issue?
Yes, exactly. Mhm. So again, it'll still be landscaped, it just won't have that site obscuring landscaping.
Further questions for Wendy or staff?
I'm not sure who would be able to answer this question, but currently you can drive, I mean, from, I think it's Fur, straight through to 7th. And so now it looks like, according to the design, that's going to be blocked off.
Correct.
And there'll be sidewalk there.
Correct. Yeah,
Removing that pass-through, does that present any potential safety concerns? Or, I mean, I don't know if,
I could certainly
Chief
let the
Hayes,
applicant describe it, but the intent is that all the bus traffic will be on the north side of the school, and they'll exit out up to Second Street, past the track, and then up, through that neighborhood. And then all the vehicular parental traffic will be on the south side, and so they're trying to separate all that traffic. And then it's the children who are in 1 through 4, that's gonna be their playground areas, so they don't wanna have them crossing a street.
right. I just wasn't sure if, for emergency services or, if not having that pass-through or thoroughfare would be an issue. But
We reviewed it through our site review, but I'll certainly let Joe answer that.
Able to respond in opposite where all the traffic is, the pedestrian traffic is okay with us, and we're putting all our infrastructure on the north side of the building.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Further questions for Wendy? Andy.
Yeah, Wendy, staff had raised concerns about the 10-foot shared use path and providing an alternative once it got to the school, and then we did receive a response to that. Were we comfortable with the proposed plan for that?
And I think it'll be reviewed at the time of engineering plans. They'll further analyze that. They submitted a map showing where the traffic was gonna flow, but I think it'll be further developed through the engineering plans.
So, because there were multiple red dots on the submittal on that, so, okay.
Further questions? Not seeing any. I know the applicant's representative is here. Dow, do you have anything to add to Wendy's staff report? Would you like to address the council? Name and address for the record, please.
Dow Powell, 135 Wilderness Lane. I will answer Frank's question if Frank would repeat the question.
The question is, according to Wendy's staff report, you guys do not have a budget for the demolition of the old Muldoon when you're finished. My understanding is one of the reasons we need a new Muldoon is that we have essentially a blighted building. I'd hate to have an empty blighted building still sitting there after we create a brand new, really nice Muldoon.
Okay, so the old Muldown does have a budget for the demolition of the school. The kindergarten wing, which is on the south side, which was built in the 90s, will remain. It's in pretty good shape, and if in case pre-K, mandatory pre-K comes along, we have an area that's pretty much ready to go for that. The part that's going to be demolished it runs east and then southeast, and that was built in the 60s. The north portion will stay, which is a second and third grade wing, and the old gymnasium. So those will be repurposed into district. You can see the little white roofs over by the track there behind the high school. That's the entire district's receiving and maintenance. So maybe that some of that building can be used for that. So that'll be within it. There's a budget of 1.6 million towards the old Muldown. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dow. Further questions for Dow? Anything further to add, Dow? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
We did advertise for a public hearing on what is item 6A of the agenda. Any public testimony on this item, just name and record, or name and address for the record when you approach the podium, please. Any testimony tonight? I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to council for a motion. Andy?
I would move to approve WCUP 18-07, the findings of fact and staff report, subject to the 9 conditions of approval as recommended to us by the Whitefish Planning Board from their June 21, 2018 meeting.
Is there
I'll
a second
second.
to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Melissa. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Michelle, good luck with the project. We will move on to item 6B, which is Resolution 18-23, a resolution of intention of the City Council of the City of Whitefish, Montana to adopt the Whitefish 57 Eagle Enterprises Sub-Area Plan as an amendment to the 2007 Whitefish City County Growth Policy, and this will be WGPA 18-01. Wendy.
Okay. So the applicants are proposing to amend the 2007 City of Whitefish Growth Policy Land Use Designation for an area out on Highway 93 South. They're proposing to change an urban or a suburban to urban and high density. The existing general commercial designation is proposed to expand to the west to align with a future Baker Avenue extension. The purpose of the growth policy map is to facilitate future zone change requests and development of the properties through future subdivisions as infill development. Just as a little bit of background, kind of how we got ourselves here. So this is the 2007 City of Whitefish Growth Policy. It shows general land use designations across the city limits and the planning jurisdiction. They're very broad. Each one of the different colors represents 2 to 3 to 4 different zoning districts, from high density to urban to suburban and rural designations, including different commercial designations as well. This is the area, the Highway 93 South corridor, where the applicant is proposing to do an amendment. And you can see there's general commercial along the highway and suburban off to the west, along with rural further to the west. A growth policy is not a regulatory document. It's just our vision for the community and how the areas are going to, at some point in the future, develop. You'll not see specific roads, you'll not see specific parks or trails. It's just very broad policy document. So this is the process that these folks are undertaking. When you're going to change the growth policy to facilitate some future development, you start with step 1, which is the growth policy amendment. So they're proposing to change the land use designations. This is the 30,000 foot level. We're up really, really super high. How are we broadly going to develop our community at some point in the future? So this is where we're at right now. Once land use designations are amended, then they could come in and ask for a zone change. They're not at the zone change level yet. And like the growth policy, there's not a lot of detail. This is, again, pretty broad. There's a range of uses in a zone change. They have to go through a public process to amend the zoning map. The next step, once a zone change application is approved, is they would come in with much more detail. This is when we find out where the road's gonna be, where's the parkland gonna be, where are the trails gonna be, how are they gonna manage their stormwater, how many units are they gonna be building, what's the kind of overall plan. So this could either be a subdivision, a conditional use permit, or a planned unit development. And through all these 3 steps, there's a public process. Through each one, there would be a public hearing. After someone gets a subdivision approved, then of course, then they start installing their infrastructure. It's reviewed and approved, and they have to meet their permit conditions. Once that happens, then building permits could be issued. So it's a long process. We're at the very high level, we're at the very top, we're at the 30,000 foot view. There's not a lot of detail at this high stage. Just as an example of some of the different neighborhood plans and sub-area type plans that the city has seen over the years, we had Big Mountain a bunch of years ago, and that was a neighborhood. It's mostly developed, but there's some areas for expansion, and they came in and got a neighborhood plan, and then they changed the zoning, and they're in the process of implementing that neighborhood plan. A couple of more plans the city has seen over the years include both the lakes, and I'm sorry, these maps are terrible, but they're pretty old, but the lakes on the left-hand side and then Iron Horse on the right-hand side. Both of these areas were pretty significant. There are lots of acreage, but again, it was undeveloped land, and the applicant, the developer, came in and said, boy, I want to put my residential here, I want to put some commercial here, I'm planning some ball fields there, I'm going to have a golf course. And they set out these broad general land use designations, and then as part of their neighborhood plans, they put together, you know, we're going to implement our plan through different types of zoning designations. So here's a couple of examples of things that we've seen in the past. So this is the proposed sub-area plan. The area that's highlighted in the bright yellow is the area that they're proposing to amend, and it's just showing it in context with its surrounding neighborhood. But the bright area is the proposed area for change. So the sub-area plan, 70 acres, about 35 of it is proposed to be amended. Areas 1 and 2, actually I'm going to go to the applicant's map. So areas 1 and 2 are designated as general commercial. They're bounded by Highway 93 on the east, a future Baker Avenue on the west, Park Knoll Lane on the north, and JP Road on the south. The applicant is proposing to extend the general commercial a bit to the west, about 200 feet, to align with Baker Avenue. Area 1 is 6.6 acres, area 2 is about 6 acres. And then they would implement it with a WB2 zoning is what they're proposing. Area 3 is designated as high density. This is the area that parallels Baker Avenue, moving to the west. It's about 9.5 acres and proposed to be zone WR4. Area 4 is designated as urban. This is the area west of Area 3, and it's located between Park Knoll and Great Northern Heights. It's proposed to be zone WR1 and is approximately 11.9 acres. The area to the west is not proposed to have any changes. Some earlier plans showed some areas for redesignation, and based out of public comment and concerns from Planning Board, they withdrew that area, and it's only the western or the eastern portion of this development. As part of the plan, the applicant has committed to providing 10% affordable housing units to assist the city in solving its affordable housing problem. As part of the sub-area plan, the applicant has shown some detail on a transportation network for how the proposed land use amendment and how they could be connected further to the west. This additional transportation information is based on a combination of topography, engineering standards, and the transportation plan. The primary road is a north-south Baker Avenue extension, which has been in several transportation plans, including our current one from 2009. An additional north-south route may occur kind of in the vicinity of the western extent of JP Road. The western end of JP Road is also called out in the transportation plan as extending further to the west, but they're not proposing to do anything to that area at all. I provided a kind of a summary because they did have two different applications. You didn't see the previous one, but some of the changes that they made in response to public comments and the Planning Board. The property is served by all public services and facilities. It is wholly within the extension of services plan, the 2009 one and the current one that you just adopted in April of this year. We did notice adjacent landowners within 150 feet of the proposed growth policy amendment, advisory agencies, and place legal in the pilot, advertising both the Planning Board meeting and this meeting tonight. Received a number of comments, and you have them all in your packets there. Folks are concerned about the requesting new neighborhood meetings with the new application, requests for tabling or denying the application, a desire for more detail, a change in community character, a loss of small town feel, incompatibility with existing neighborhoods, loss of property values, high density development, traffic and safety, suggesting waiting until the Highway 93 South Corridor plan is complete, loss of wildlife, habitat, loss of open space, inadequate affordable housing being proposed, too much affordable housing being proposed, trespassing, impacts to public infrastructure, groundwater and pollution, both light and air. We received several more comments after Planning Board that were very consistent with some of these themes. We review these according to the standards in the growth policy. We don't have any regulatory, we've never adopted any standards for regulations on reviewing these types of plans, so the only thing we have is what's in the growth policy. So those criteria including substantially furthering the goals and vision of the growth policy. The sub-area plan has identified specific goals including protecting water quality. The western boundary of that land use change is 125 feet from the furthest extent of the wetland, which of course will be further reviewed at the time of development, but they're not proposing to encroach any closer than 125 feet. Providing community facilities, including Baker Avenue, and providing affordable housing opportunities. Under preserving and enhancing the character and qualities of small town feel for Whitefish, the sub-area plan has identified area 4 with a zoning designation of WR1, which requires a minimum of a 10,000 square foot lot size, which is adjacent to existing subdivisions that have the exact same zoning district. So the zoning is complementary to the Parknell neighborhood. They have a county zoning of R3, but it's the same as our WR1. And then Great Northern Heights has a WR1 zoning district. Through the process of working with the applicant, we did suggest that they identify which zoning districts they're likely going to implement their plan with, so it'll make it easier when they come back in. We can say, yeah, you're compliant or not. And then also to give the adjacent landowners some predictability as to what kind of zoning would happen next to their homes. Because the options for zoning districts is so broad, we wanted to make sure that they knew what was happening. The sub-area plan identifies high density as being buffered from existing neighborhoods by lower density, and this has been kind of a concern that's been ongoing with development along the highway. So they're showing the higher density closer to the commercial, buffered by lower density instead of having super high density right next to low density residential. This area is also, because it's near Highway 93 where there's a possibility for transit, and there's other nearby services including commercial uses in the hospital. Again, the previous plan set aside 25 acres of open space that contained the wetland and the stormwater conveyance, and that was a real community benefit because they were going to allow public access and trails. But they have pulled that area back out of concern from the neighbors and planning board. So that area is not going to be redesignated, and it'll be maintained in private ownership. So you can kind of see the yellow area there. A portion of that too, a large portion of that area is in the county. So any development, if they don't need to hook to city services, would happen in the county. So that area again will stay as suburban, residential, and rural. The sub-area plan indicates that they'll also include architectural design standards, which would likely be in their CC&Rs to ensure high quality design. And then all multifamily projects, of course, have to have architectural review standards. So the city is currently working with a consultant to develop inclusionary zoning regulations. So staff is recommending that the 10% affordable housing goal within the sub-area plan be in addition to any affordable housing required through any adopted IZ program. So if the application was submitted today, we could get 10%, but if in some future date we have an IZ standard, the 10% would be in addition to whatever standard the regulations have. So the sub-area plan again shows Baker Avenue extension, which has again long been in our transportation plans as a north-south connector parallel to Highway 93. The applicant, if this project proceeds, would be obligated to construct that road as part of their development. One of the criteria is providing all on and off-site improvements. Again, this is a difficult criteria for a sub-area plan as, again, we're at the high level. We're not actually implementing or putting in any water lines or sewer lines. But again, the applicant would be obligated to make all those extensions and infrastructure improvement at the time of development. There is adequate water, sewer, and public streets available, though, to this project. Under avoid or effectively mitigate any and all adverse impacts on existing neighborhood, the sub-area plan is locating similar densities adjacent to existing neighborhoods and is locating the higher density along Baker Avenue, buffered by the single-family detached neighborhoods. And okay, so then there's also within the growth policy a couple of other criteria for amendments that someone could apply for a growth policy amendment to the city council, including an error, and the applicant is not making this request due to an error of the growth policy. Community conditions have changed, so the applicant is not claiming that there's any community conditions that have changed, making this project more developable, but our knowledge of needed housing has changed, and the ability to provide this housing within existing vacant lots, especially the higher density, could be challenging. There's just not a lot of large lots to develop multifamily. So that was identified again in the housing needs assessment as a significant need in our community, and it hasn't kept pace with single family home development. And providing clear and extraordinary community benefit. Again, the applicant is providing an additional 10% affordable housing, and they're implementing our transportation plan. The planning board held a public hearing on June 21st. Of course, they held a couple of public hearings earlier as well. But the most recent one was June 21st. A number of folks spoke at the public hearing, including a few in support, but 8 with a number of concerns, and the minutes are attached to your packet. They weren't able to come to a recommendation. They were a tie vote for and a tie vote against. So this is coming to you without any sort of recommendation from planning board. So staff continues to recommend approval of the growth policy, including changing goal number 1, that an additional 10% of residential units would be provided for affordable housing, which would be reviewed at the time of development. You also got a letter from the applicant, I believe on Friday, with a revised plan, again, that's responding to the concerns that were raised by the neighbors and the public hearing and planning board. And I'll just briefly touch on this, but I'm going to let the applicant talk about it a little bit more. They're proposing to change the high density area along Baker Avenue to urban, so it would no longer be WR4, and they're proposing to implement that with a WR1 or WR2 zoning district. And this is something certainly the council could consider, and staff is in support of this proposal. This would be fine as well. But again, this is a lot of comments at the planning board said if it was only all WR1 or it was all only urban, then we would support this plan. So, I think this is their attempt at fixing some of those concerns. Can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks very much, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy from the council at this time? Any questions? Not seeing any. Richard, excuse me.
Other questions I have tried to put together. Could you go back to your flow chart that had that one? How would we determine, or how would, in step 3, whether it's going to be a conditional use, planned unit development, subdivision, how would that determination
It'd be
be
just
made?
depend on what the applicant applies for. If they want to subdivide the land, they would be bringing in a subdivision application. If they need a PUD as part of their subdivision, they would be submitting that. It'd be just kind of like any other development projects that we see. Those are just sort of the different types of land use permits that we suspect could be applied for at that time.
Okay. If I may, Mr. Mayor, with regards to affordable housing, is this the point at which we need to have the discussion whether or not affordable housing should be constructed concurrent with, in proportion to, but concurrent with the phasing or the development of the project, and whether or not we should also include, or is this the time to include, perhaps the requirement that it is in all of the proposed housing types?
So during our earlier public hearings, we did have a number of changes, and I think maybe you were at one of those first meetings, because we were concerned about some of those things too. So we had them, if you look on page 14 of their packet, we had them kind of modify some of their original goals, and they incorporated all the things that we were concerned about. Including policy 1B, which is provide a variety of housing types within the sub-area plan and distribute the permanently affordable housing throughout the sub-area plan. So we did have them put that in as a policy for the neighborhood plan.
Okay, thanks. If anybody else has a question, I still need to sort through some things, so.
Sure, we can always call Wendy back up later too as well, Richard. Any further questions for Wendy? Would you like us to wait for a few, Richard?
No,
or
go ahead.
continue? Okay. I will call up the applicant. We do limit applicants' presentations for land use applications to 30 minutes. I see several of the applicants' team here, so I'll leave it up to you who would like to start, and we'll go from there. And just for the record, your name and address when you do approach the council, please.
I also have a Google map too, so if you need an aerial view, it's at the very end, so we can always put that up for you.
Great, thanks.
So Wendy kind of showed you the revision that we submitted on Friday, and I'll just hand you out a map that you can have in front of you.
Eric.
So,
name and address,
yep.
please.
My name's Eric Mulcahy, Sand Surveying, 2 Village Loop, Kalispell. I'm one of the consultants working for the applicants on this project. We began working on this Whitefish 57 Eagle Enterprise project last spring in doing our due diligence to do wetlands delineations, look at some very initial and broad brush traffic reports, and essentially start to do our homework in creating a sub-area plan. We held our first neighborhood meeting on September 21st of last year, and then we held a subsequent one with the Park Knoll neighborhood on November 28th of last year. With all of the information that we gathered, we put together an application and submitted it in January. That particular application went through 2 hearings with the city county planning board, and essentially we ended up with a recommendation for denial at the second meeting. So we essentially pulled our application from the council agenda so we could go back, look at the comments that we received from the planning board and the public at those meetings, and then we came up with the plan that is up on the board behind you. So essentially, that plan went through its process. I think we submitted it in April, and we had planning board meeting in June. And as Wendy stated, we ended up with a 3-3 tie with the planning board. So again, we were trying to, I guess, think about this plan and what were the objections from the planning board. And we could still sense a lot of emotion from those folks that spoke in opposition to the plan in the public hearing. So in essence, the map that I just handed out to you is essentially trying to address some of those concerns. We heard loud and clear that if the whole thing was designated urban, that might be something that they could live with or work with us as we further move down the process of developing this property. So That designation that I show you essentially maintains what was urban, but the multifamily, the brown, also changes to urban residential with an R1 or R2 potential zoning. So my clients still want to develop some multifamily product on this site, but what this compromise does is will essentially require us to go through a PUD process with the city, the planning board, and you folks, and work with the neighborhood on that. So that was the other item that we had heard loud and clear through the process, is that everybody wanted more detail. And as Wendy pointed out, growth policies aren't the place where you provide detail, because we're just trying to figure out the land use. We're not trying to figure out sewer and water and roads, although we have some rough roads kind of shown in here. So if this plan is approved with all urban residential, and at the point we're ready to come back with our zoning, we could also come in with our PUD and provide a higher level of detail. We can show our open space, we can show our traffic network, we can show our buildings, our architecture, we can show the forest areas that we're going to preserve, we can, you know, have the wetlands clearly delineated and the setbacks from those. So essentially all the detail can be worked out down the road in that second and third tier of Wendy's flow chart. But we can, I think we can provide it earlier with the zoning. That is essentially where we are. I will just point out that with this amendment, after our first two meetings with the planning board, we did essentially scale this project back in half. We took the whole east half of the project off, because there just seemed to be too much confusion over what was going to be park, where the wetland was, and that sort of thing. So there's no plans for any development on that side of the project. It's still focused on the east half of the 70 acres, the 35 acres as part of this sub-area plan. We are still proposing the 10% affordable housing, and we're in complete agreement with the staff's recommendation that that be in addition to whatever the city has at the time. So presently, for example, the city has a 20% requirement for affordable housing in their PUD requirements. So if we come in with a PUD, we're going to be at 30%. That's a substantial community benefit, I believe. The other benefit that we're providing with this plan is a significant portion of that Baker Avenue extension. These, the Baker Avenue as the Whitefish Avenue on the east side of the highway, have been in your transportation plans for 20 or more years. And they're intended to provide north-south movement to take the pressure off of 93. And as we all know, making left-hand turn movements on 93 is difficult, as it is getting to those commercial uses on the highway corridor. So those Whitefish Avenue and the Baker Avenue provide you essentially backdoor access to the commercial, as well as providing movement. And at the cross streets where you have lights like JP Road, you can freely move across the highway at a controlled intersection. So we feel that those are substantial improvements, and from where we started back in January, we've scaled this project back with development locations, the scale of the project, and significantly the density. So with that, I'll conclude, and Jeff will touch on some of the housing and the type of people we're trying to reach.
Thanks, Eric. Jeff?
Mayor Wolfo, Jeff Swinson, 134 East Montour Ridge in Kalispell, and I am the applicant. So I'd like to just give you a blown-up version of what's in your packet for the demographics for Whitefish housing. So what you see on the form in front of you is just simply a blown-up version of what's in your package. It's a live project, Whitefish Crossing, just down the road, which is part of the Baker Avenue plan. We've given the land. It's back there, dedicated and lonely. What you see on this list here is everything. There's transparency in all aspects with our new construction over on Whitefish Crossing. We've got pastors, nurse, Safeway employee, Burlington Northern, retired military, waitress, well, you get it. Go on down through the list. This is accurate as of Friday. So this is an updated list of individuals without their names being listed, but it even gives the reason for moving. It gives where they came from. So we're in a crisis here. Whitefish has no housing. We're out. The rents on here are ridiculous even to me. They're high. Whitefish Housing Authority has the lowest rents on there. They're on a factor of 80% of area median income. So if you look down the list and you notice an aberration to the rents, that's our Whitefish Housing Authority. Now it looks like it got cut off on this list. No, it didn't. You can see on page 2 on the very top there, affordable housing. That's a rent that was $1,450, and we're getting $952 for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, larger unit. Folks, that's affordable. That used to be purchasing a home in Whitefish not that long ago. We were buying $180,000, $200,000 houses downtown. Now those rehabs are going overnight. They're getting bid up, and they're largely going to people from out of town that can afford to pay cash, and then the sellers don't have to go through the process of waiting for a bank loan and wondering if a young individual can afford to buy that house. Wait the 30 days and see if the financing goes through. In the planning meeting on June 21st, we heard from, one of the residents and, in fact, the Vice President of Great Northern Heights, Mr. Cody Hughes. He stated that he believes bringing affordable housing is objectively a good idea. But when he looked at moving to Montana 2 years ago, he looked at the traffic and crime data, did not want to live in Kalispell for that reason. Mr. Hughes did not want Whitefish to become Kalispell and thinks there should be an income buffer. Get that, an income buffer between the two towns. Who are we? Privileged, snotty little kids living in Whitefish, sending our kids off to Columbia Falls or Kalispell or whoever will take them. Who's going to solve this problem? We're not evil developers. We're very transparent. We're trying to work with Park Knoll, our nearest neighbors. They don't want us to use their road. I get it. Totally cool. If that's the way, I wish we could work out an agreement to work on that same road so they could turn left this tough time of year and cross traffic. Love to have the use and participate in the cost of creating that road to make it a major contribution to town. On the south side of our subdivision area, we have JP Road. One of the questions that came up during the planning board hearing was, gosh, over on the east side of 93, from JP Road down to McDonald's, there's all sorts of housing. And if you look at the land use map, can you get the land use map up for me? Oh, up and down arrow. On this side, this side. So if you notice on the right-hand side of the map in the kind of brownish area, all that high density that's in behind the red, from McDonald's all the way to Highway 40, there's 804 units, all sharing JP Road coming into town, all happily sharing it. There's not congestion at JP Road next to Don K and Highway 93. Over on the other side where we're proposing our density, We have 134 units now that would share Baker Avenue coming all the way down to JP Road. Now that's before our density. Add our density to that, call it another 200 units, just guessing. Call it another 200. We're still way under what's happening on the other side of the highway. We're mirrors one another. We've got Baker Avenue going all the way through eventually. The city hopes to do it by 2020. And we got to get moving if we're going to do that. Whitefish Avenue over on the east side. Somehow it's moving 800 residents back and forth over on parts of Whitefish Avenue, and we're close to getting that last little bit done. That last little bit that goes through Dale and Dentistry back behind there. And that will flow down to JP Road. But somehow we're servicing 800 people onto JP Road. Folks, the traffic isn't going to be an issue. That is not where we're headed. So, in conclusion, I just want to say that we're here to be inclusionary. This community needs its wait staff. It needs the people that we train, that we send. I sent my kid to college. I'd love to have her live here. She can't afford it. She's a teacher. She can't live in Whitefish on her own. So when are we going to get to the point where these people matter, that we can build single-family residences, we can have affordable housing in the form of multifamily? These are not criminals. These are the waiters and waitresses that serve us all. They're the school teachers, the firemen, police officers, nurses. Do you guys have any questions for me?
We may later on, Jeff.
Okay.
But thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
Would anyone else from the team like to present before we move on to public comment? Sean.
I'll speak briefly, Mayor and Council. I'm Sean Averill, 2060 Houston Drive. I'm part of the development team, obviously. I think Jeff and Eric did a pretty good job presenting that for you guys. I just give you a little bit of history. Mrs. Morris came to me about 2 years ago to develop this property, and it's been in her family now, I think 85 years is what I heard. So she's watched everything develop around her, and you know, they've kind of sat patiently, and you know, now is the time they'd like to develop it. And you know, it's pretty important because she's, you know, a nice lady, and this is, you know, her, you know, retirement basically, and the family. So Jeff spoke on Whitefish Crossing. That, I don't know if you guys are all familiar, most of you worked with me on that, but that was the developer of that. So that's the 60 units just north of this. We did 10% affordable too. And I think it was pretty good success. Obviously we could have, maybe looking back, maybe changed things around it, but I think it was very successful, and the list is pretty impressive who's in there with teachers and nurses. And so I think that is a pretty good representation. We heard all the same arguments when we were doing that project about the renters in there were going to be starting fires in the woods and criminals, and you know, it was a very controversial project. And so you know, I think these things can work next to neighborhoods. So just want to get you guys have that, and I think this is a good opportunity. So we'll be around. Thank you for asking for questions.
Thanks, Sean. We did advertise for a public hearing on what will be Resolution 18-23, and we'll hold that public hearing now. I do have a sign-up list, but certainly if you didn't sign up, that doesn't mean you can't provide comment. It's certainly within my purview as chairman of the board to limit public comment. I'm going to elect to not limit public comment this evening, given the nature of the application in front of us. However, I would request that folks self-police the time that they take at the podium out of courtesy for the board. We have a lengthy public comment period coming up, I assume, and so please, out of respect for others that would like to comment, please police yourselves, so to speak. And we'll start with Michelle.
Mr. Mayor, honorable members of the City Council, my name is Michelle Tafoya, 1524 West Lake Shore Drive, and along with Ms. Hermanka of Conradi Anderson, I represent the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. Before I get into what were my prepared remarks, I just want to, as you've seen, Mr. Van Canagan from Dotsopolis, McDonald and Lind submitted a letter on June 29th, wherein he proposed a last-minute 11th hour change to this application. Ms. Hrmadka is going to address why it's unlawful for this council to consider the 11th hour attempt to amend the application. But just briefly, the record at this point is beyond incoherent. Not only this change at the last minute, not only does that undermine the right to participate, because what are these folks going to comment on? Are we commenting on the original application, the amended application, or this last minute change? What is being considered here? Second, I think I'm at 4 applicants that have applied for this sub-area plan amendment. The first was Whitefish 57 LLC, a non-existent business entity. The second was Whitefish Housing Group doing business as Whitefish 57 LLC. That actually is not true under Montana law. Then the most recent amended application, Whitefish Housing Group LLC, not doing business as Whitefish 57, was the applicant. And then tonight, Jeff Swenson says that he is the applicant. So who is the applicant? Who's representing that everything in this application is true and correct? At this point, again, the record is beyond incoherent, and public participation just wouldn't allow for the council to approve this application at this point. So I'm going to take a step back also and just point out that contrary to the city manager's report, wherein he designated this matter as a quasi-judicial matter, in fact, it is a legislative matter. And that the Montana Supreme Court has said growth policy amendments are legislative matters. And I know that the Whitefish City Code is conflicting with that, but the Montana Supreme Court's interpretation of what a growth policy amendment would carry the day. And why is it important that this is a legislative matter? It's important for 3 reasons. 1, it's subject to citizen referenda. 2, it affords a judicial relief for my client, which would be up and including declaratory judgment relief. And 3, and probably what you would care most about, is that it guides the standard of review that you all should be considering as you're considering this application. And the standard of review in a court of law for this council's action would be whether this action, whether a decision to approve this application would be arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful. And it's my client's contention that the application, that approval of the application would be arbitrary, capricious, and unlawful because for several reasons. I'm not going to go through all the reasons, but in the interest of time. But first, it would result in a land use designation that is inconsistent with the future land use designations contained in the growth policy. Ms. Hrmadka will talk more about that in her comments. Second, the applicant has failed to comply with the growth policy amendment requirements and the city's sub-area plan application requirements. I go into great detail about that in our prior letters. Third, the application has failed to provide detailed findings sufficient to meet the growth policy's strict community benefit test. Again, probably the association letter dated February 6, 2018 went into great detail on how the applicant has failed to prevent findings to that effect. And in the updated applications to that end, the application removed all previous references to the wetlands area. Now, it's unclear whether the wetlands area is included in this amended application because, and as Ms. Hrmadka will explain, staff has said that it is, staff has said that it isn't, and so again, the record is unclear on that point. But at this point, if the amended application is what this council is considering, the applicant provides no findings which address how the applicant will avoid or mitigate the development's impacts to the wetland area. And it's not just that it's no longer, part of that rural area is no longer subject, they're not proposing at this point that it's going to be developed, but there's a greater, broader context that I think the city council should consider. For instance, in one of the prior public comments, I believe it was Carmel Johnston, mentioned that she's seen nesting bald eagles adjacent to the wetlands area. And I think probably it would be where the multi-use housing would go. So does the council want to know if there are nesting bald eagles, where that development is going to go? Should the applicant be required to tell you what the wildlife impacts are going to be? And should they give you findings that they will mitigate it in one way or another? Finally, and then I'll wrap up, I promise. There is no applicant of record, again, I mentioned that, and there are no authorized representatives of record to support a decision to approve the application. So in conclusion, I would encourage this council to deny the application, and I thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to start at the top of the list and work my way down. We'll start with Mark. I apologize, I can't pronounce the last name. Volk, excuse me.
My name is Mark Volker. I live at 128 Park Knoll Lane with my wife Kathleen Grant. Suffice to say that the packet was rather large this week, wasn't it? And I'm going on the assumption that all of you have read our comments that have come in past the deadline or before the deadline with regard to what the planning board had a couple of weeks ago. With that said, I can keep my thing short here. All due respect, I agree with Michelle in that this is highly confusing. It's been changed in between meetings so many times. I feel that the public comment, we don't even know really where to go with this right now as far as what is actually being asked anymore. The period of changing its name to a sub-area plan, everybody's scratching their head, including the planning board. And I think really what a lot of this comes down to is the developer wanting a confusion level here, maybe so that you folks don't even know what you're trying to pass here. They keep talking about this 30,000 foot view, but in reality, they're using minute portions of this to either bait or to try to convince the planning board and you folks to approve a growth policy amendment that probably shouldn't be done in this context. Some comments I had about Jeff, you know, I see his heartfelt speech about needing housing here, but capitalistic system, nobody gets a free ride. I had to work to build my house, and which brings me to the fact that I built a house, bought and paid for the land because I worked hard at it. Nobody handed me affordable housing. I wish they would have. But now I'm worried that a development such as this will ruin the value of my house and my lifelong investment. As I said, we worked hard. I've worked hard enough to basically retire now early without a pension. So I have no income right now, so maybe that affordable housing might come in handy for me, but I think not. I'd just rather see my value of my house stay the same. Park Knoll, Eric mentioned that we met with Park Knoll, and they're no good guys there because we won't agree with their subdivision. The facts are is that they met with Park Knoll twice. Once an impromptu, informal meeting with a couple of our officers. Then one time, of course, we were invited to the first neighborhood meeting, and then they had a second neighborhood meeting with us. And at that second neighborhood meeting, the developers came in, the applicants came in, and the representatives, agents, and basically said, we want Park Knoll Lane. We want you to donate it to the city so that we can use it for our subdivision. Well, I'm sorry, that's all they offered us. They really offered us nothing that we could use that we don't already have. And we've been paying taxes as a homeowners association on that for years. That Park Knoll was developed in the 70s and developed with covenants that preserve our home values and our neighborhood as it is now. And we're very concerned with the densities proposed in this. Whichever application we're dealing with, the densities are all too high. Something said is Mr. Mulcahy made it sound like he's been trying to meet with us, and that's the last time he ever had any contact was November. And we did write a letter because of that. We did write a letter saying we will not allow the use of our road at this time. So they haven't tried to contact us since at Park Knoll. I am a vice president of the Park Knoll Homeowners Association, and Charlie Duffy, the president, couldn't be here tonight, so just an explanation there. As far as the map on the wall here, the high-density areas to the side that Jeff said so many trips are coming down JP Road, well, all of that can go north out of McDonald's too, and so that's only half of the traffic that comes out of there can come that way now. It's a thoroughfare through there. The density in that was built when, and applied for and approved and built under the subdivision regulations, just like you guys approve every week or day or deal with all year long. But the difference is none of those subdivisions that were over on that side was next to an existing subdivision, an established subdivision. Park Knoll and Great Northern Heights are existing and established, and it doesn't go without getting by me that we said, in fact, I said at one of the planning board meetings that if you took your whole plan as far as this, at that time, as far as their plan for this, if they made it all single-family homes, I wouldn't be up here talking right now. We wouldn't protest it. Now, through a PUD or CUP, if they want to put high-density housing in there, yes, we would protest that, because it does not and is not complementary to Park Knoll Lane, which is 16 houses on 20 acres, or Great Northern Heights, which is WR1 at this time. Eric mentioned several times, and he kind of let it slip past really quick, well, we'll make this either WR1 or WR2. And to me, that's the bait and switch. They're not being forthcoming with you folks or us, and I'd like that all on public record. In conclusion, the traffic study they did, that's in that packet, is faulty. They continue to mention Park Knoll Lane as their source of escape from their development. I did talk to the Department of Transportation, and they are not allowing any new curb cuts without substantial processes that are involved. That could come, but I don't see MDOT granting a road 100 feet south of Park Knoll Lane, as in the pictures that we saw earlier. Like to keep it short, and if you've read all my comments that are in there and the comments of Park Knoll Lane, I stand behind those. There's a lot of facts in there that pertain to this, and the pure fact that this was changed on Friday again, I think this should be, this whole process should be either tabled or disapproved to allow the developer to come back with what he really wants, and something that we can all look at and we know is factual and not a idealistic conception out here that will change as soon as they get in a growth policy amendment. I want to thank you guys for your time, and thanks for the public opportunity for public comment.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate your comments. Crystal Crawford is signed up next, and then Roger Sherman and Gail Kennedy to follow.
Hi, I'm Crystal Crawford, 216 Empire Loop. So I first got to say I just take major offense to Mr. Mark's comment about handouts. I work really, really hard at my job, and I'm trying to break into Whitefish. I have a great budget. This 30% affordable housing would be my ideal vision. I'm a professional who commutes into Whitefish for work. I'm a single mom. I have a 7-year-old son who I'd love to get into the Whitefish School District. I'd love to get him in sports here. He'll be in 2nd grade. And at my budget, I'm looking at the Montera with $300 a month HOA dues. How do you feel about those? That's kind of tough to swallow for somebody that's going to live there every day. or I'm looking at a fixer-upper. I'm looking at a $300,000, $200,000 fixer-upper, which as a single mom with a 7-year-old son who works really hard, Mr. Mark, I don't actually have the time for that. I don't have time to come home and update my home or work on my interior, my exterior of my home. So I'm in favor of the affordable housing of this plan, and I just wanted to make sure that that was voiced. It's people like me and professionals like me that would come in for this. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Crystal. Roger.
Roger Sherman, 280 Brimstone, Great Northern Heights. Thanks for the opportunity. I had two main points in opposition to the plan, and one, I just found out the high density, the large density is going to be changed, and I wasn't aware of that. But my other one is I'm a member of the 93 South Corridor committee, which we've had 2 meetings and we're just starting and getting our feet wet. Next week we will have our meeting on traffic. And this is my concern. We recently approved Eagle Lake, which is like either 60 or 80 condominium units, and also Deer Creek, which is beside Don Kay is another, I think, multi-housing or duplex. And those 2 developments in themselves will increase the traffic on 93. And this is a problem. We do have a problem on 93, and we have not yet even begun as the committee to address it. But yet we're approving more housing. So I'm asking that we step back, wait, because this committee probably won't wrap up its findings for another year. We need to step back, stop the crazy development, and see what we can do to alleviate traffic jams. Also the infrastructure, which I understand that the sewage treatment plant won't be done for another 5 years, and we're developing more housing. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Is it 5 or in the future for the sewage treatment 3? Okay. So let's step back, look at traffic, which should be done before development is done. Let's put the horse in front of the cart and not the cart in front of the horse, and just put things on hold for a while until we can get a good traffic plan entering and leaving the city. Thank you for your comment, or
Thanks,
for your
Roger.
opportunity.
Thank you. Gail Kennedy. And then Lindsay, you're up next.
Good evening, Gail Kennedy, 298 Brimstone Drive, and I live right on the corner of Brimstone and JP Road. So we're kind of at ground zero with one of the proposals that was conceptual at the time to bring some the traffic from the new proposal down on into Great Northern Heights. And so my concerns really rest in two areas, but that was also based on the original proposal that we were presented in the springtime. And so I would just want to echo Michelle's comments that it's utterly confusing to try to comment on this from a neighborhood standpoint, because we don't know, is this a 35-acre proposal, as I heard tonight, or a 70-acre proposal? And is it now an area that includes multifamily, high-density housing, or is it single-family, you know, WR1 or WR2? And those points of confusion don't really allow us as a neighborhood to meaningfully comment on this proposal. And my main areas of concern were, as I mentioned before, was the circulation that could be funneled into Great Northern Heights, which is an area with a lot of small children. There's a lot of concern for public safety with 4 times the volume of traffic proposed to come through it. As well as I also had the concern that this area with the amendment for high density housing was not in compliance with the 2007 growth plan. As we originally, when we purchased our property, we thought that that was what the city promised us was going to be the kind of development there. And so I just would urge the city council to take a step back and to present us a more coherent plan and proposal of what this sub-area plan might look like. And I appreciate your comments tonight and being able to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
Lindsay Ramadka, 307 Spokane Avenue, Whitefish, Conradi Anderson. So I, along with Michelle, as you know, represent the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. The last time the City Council approved a growth policy review conducted by planning staff was in 2009. The growth policy, however, mandates that the growth policy must be reviewed every 2 years. At this point, we are almost 10 years out from a growth policy review. My clients feel very strongly that the growth policy needs to be reviewed and updated pursuant to the growth policy itself before the sub-area plan should even be considered. The growth policy's purpose, as you all know, is to set forth a broad public policy founded in community vision. The sub-area plan you have before you tonight is obviously not founded in community vision. In fact, the vast majority of the surrounding community strongly opposes this plan. To approve it would erode the community vision the growth policy was established to promote. The applicant's attorney, Mr. Van Cannigan, apparently recognizing how out of character the sub-area plan is with the rest of the neighborhood, proposes to change the high-density designation to urban residential through a letter sent to City Council on June 29th, 3 days ago. The applicant cannot change his application through a letter 3 days before the City Council meeting. This application needs to be formally changed so that the public can meaningfully participate. If the council approved such a change tonight, it would be arbitrary, capricious, and it would undermine the public's right to know and the public's right to participate. There is also significant confusion surrounding the application in regards to the wetlands, as you've already heard. Are the western 36 acres included in the application, or are they excluded from it? The land is included in the staff report and the application as confirmed by Mr. Van Cannigan's letter on June 29th. Yet at the planning board and here tonight, staff represented this 36 acres was in fact not part of the application. This confusion again undermines the public's right to know and participate because they do not know what they are participating about. If the sub-area plan is approved, will the 36 acres with very wonderful wetlands that have amazing wildlife and other great wet stuff, will it be annexed into the city? Will they stay in county jurisdiction without any restrictions whatsoever? They've taken out anything about the wetlands, so if approved as is, there is absolutely no conditions. Can the city condition that this 36 acres at a later date? A few things. I know Wendy said that this is not a regulatory document, and it's not, but it does need to be substantially complied with. Also, I know that we've been talking about not a lot of detail with sub-area plans, but we've actually, City of Whitefish has never done a sub-area plan. Neighborhood plans are significantly different. So that's something to be mindful about. This would be a new precedence that you're setting here tonight. Also, last thing, applicant is proposing 10% affordable housing. I think we're all in agreement, even Mark, even though I think he accidentally misspoke. Affordable housing is great for Whitefish, but 10% affordable housing is not gonna get us there. even 30%. If these guys really see such a critical need and such a crisis, as Mr. Swenson said, then let's commit to 50% or more. 10% is just not getting us there. So, lastly, I just want to reiterate that this is a growth policy amendment. It should be changed with consent and support of the local community and not as a battle with developers pushing for high density growth where it's not warranted. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. We have another Lindsay Marshall who signed up, if you'd like.
Good evening. My name is Diane Peterson. My husband and I are owners occupants of the house and lot at 286 Brimstone Drive, located in Great Northern Heights. Our home is one of 4 homes on Brimstone immediately off JP Road. The owners occupants of these 4 homes are retirees. You have already heard from 2 of them, Gail Kennedy and Roger Sherman. I echo their comments. I would like to submit to you a letter I've written with regard to a few of my concerns regarding the Whitefish 57 Eagle Enterprises plan as amended for rezoning for a proposed high-density neighborhood bordering on JP Road. Their plan for such a neighborhood would immediately be between Great Northern Heights and Park Knoll, 2 existing neighborhoods. If traffic is allowed to come from JP Road into Great Northern Heights, my concerns include child endangerment, the future growth of Great Northern Heights, which is not yet built out, drainage flooding problems experienced by residents of Great Northern Heights, non-compliance with City of Whitefish growth policy, in particular, changing the zoning so that such a plan would have adverse impacts on 2 existing neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to deviate from the list. It's whoever would like to approach the council, please do.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Marshall, 260 Short Pine Drive, Kalispell. And I'm just here in support of this development. I grew up in Whitefish. I went to high school here. My parents still live here. I have 2 little boys. They're 2 and 4. Currently, they're enrolled in the Woodland Montessori School. And I would love for them to come back to Whitefish where I grew up. This is an amazing community. I know the benefits of it, having been a product of this school system. And quite frankly, I work really hard. I'm a professional in Kalispell and in Whitefish. My husband owns his own business. He's a military veteran. And we make a significant amount of money. But what's on the market currently in the city of Whitefish, there's not a lot there. And what is on the market in our price range is gone within 24 hours. So just breaking back into this city, which is my home, has proven to be very difficult. So I think this sounds like a great opportunity, especially for other young families that are just starting out and have little kids. As far as kids being a problem in the neighborhoods, I don't think it is. I think it's great to have a lot of families in one area. The ball fields are right across the street. It's a perfect area for families. So I just wanted to come and voice my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Name's Cody Hughes from 167 Granite, Vice President of Great Northern Heights Homeowners Association. Apparently I'm the snotty little kid, as referenced by Jeff. That's fairly inflammatory. I think I've actually never been defamed in the public eye before. That's a new one. I came from a very poor upbringing, in fact so poor that I had to get food from a church with my little brother, and that was the only way that I could survive. Yes, I was the one that suggested a buffering zone between Whitefish and Kalispell, and I'd like to speak to that just for a second. I have lived in very poor areas, everywhere from Salinas, California, with gangs such as Norteños, Sureños, throughout Puerto Rico. I've been mobbed 3 times. I've lived in
countries around the world. I've traveled all around the world. I've lived in 4 states in the United States and traveled through 16. I have a fairly diverse experience with people, with cultures, with life. I've been at the low end of racism as a white person, surprisingly. You do see that in other countries. And Jeff asked, who are we? I'm going to leave that question open, and I want the council to think about that, because my suggestions, as someone not being an expert on growth in a city and in a particular area, I have to leave that expertise up to the council, up to the mayor, up to you folks. The implication was that I have no compassion for people. That really couldn't be more wrong. My career has been based in public health and in service to other people. I spoke on a personal basis, and I have concerns as somebody that has a 3-year-old and a new kid coming into this world as well. This gentleman has a child that's a school teacher, that's an adult, and probably unlikely to get run over by an increase in traffic on their particular block and in their area. I lived in an area very similar to Whitefish, and that area was Auburn, California, and it was right next to Roseville, California, which was in a way very identical to Kalispell. I lived there for 5 years, and in that 5 years I went from a place where you could park in a Target parking lot and leave your doors open and not even worry about it, to all of a sudden there's stabbings of police officers in that Target parking lot. An area that had the highest police per capita of any county in California, and some of the best police, mind you. I got to a point in the latter years where I got so used to helicopters flying over chasing criminals that when there was a criminal in my area that had just shot a police officer in the head, additionally 2 more police, I didn't check the news because I was used to those helicopters flying over. It didn't even register for a good 10 minutes before I realized something was going on and I needed to check in with my community.
I don't mean to interrupt you, Cody, and with all due respect, if you could stick to the merits of the application and speak specifically to the application, it would be preferred.
Sure. I believe in community. That's one of the reasons I joined the HOA. And that I believe that all public servants should comply with the majority of the public's desires. I happen to not be a public servant, but I do believe that as a tenant. All I suggest is that the council take great consideration at the increase in density into a particular city. Whether that be in the central area, or if you can spread that density to the outlining areas, and maybe there's a better balance. Maybe every developer shouldn't have to follow a 10% affordable housing in a certain area, but that area could be redesignated to another area. I am not opposed to that at all. I think we have a great community. It's because of the community that I've come to love in just such a short time of being here that I want to preserve that community. And I hope that you all would want to preserve that community. I meant no offense by my suggestions of not wanting to be in Kalispell, but that is my personal feelings. I spent 6 years researching every state in the country before I found Whitefish. I have a book here, I wrote notes, I'm not gonna go into all that, but I literally spent 6 years trying to find out where I wanted to relocate my family. And I spent a lot of time doing that, and when I found Whitefish, not only myself, but my wife is happier than she's ever been with this area. So I just ask that you don't take it lightly and that you consider it the whole gravity of it in its entirety. Thank you.
Thanks, Cody.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Bill Van Canigan. I'm at 201 West Main Street in Missoula, Montana, and I'm legal counsel for the applicant. And I guess I'm the infamous Mr. Van Canigan that wrote the letter. I want to just take a few minutes to respond to some of the legal comments that were previously made by the lawyers for the homeowners associations. My letter did not initiate the changes to the application that you've seen here this evening. The changes to the application were discussed last week, as I understand it, by Mr. Mulcahy and Mr. Swenson and the planning staff, who sat down, talked about what had occurred at the planning board, talked about the comments and concerns of the citizens who spoke at the planning board, and talked about what they could do to once again reconfigure this application in a way that would address those concerns. And so what we're trying to accomplish here is to decrease density and to change the designation from multifamily to urban, which is exactly what was proposed by Ms. Flowers in her written submission to the planning board at the last meeting. So there's no rocket science to this. It's a matter of attempting to address the concerns of the citizens who raised those concerns at the last meeting, and to put forth a plan that's a compromise, or a plan that is designed to speak directly to those comments. I want to just take a minute to talk about the comments that were made about multiple applicants here. The applicant hasn't changed from the inception of this process. The applicants, Mr. Swenson, who is the applicant's representative, has attended every one of these meetings, including the various planning board meetings that have occurred. Initially, the application was submitted with the signature of the landowners, which is permissible. They're the ones who ultimately have to approve this development. The policy of the law, as articulated by the Montana Supreme Court, is to favor the handling of these applications on the merits, not based upon technicalities. The Montana Supreme Court has made it very clear that in Montana we elevate substance over form. And precluding matters from being heard on the merits because of procedural irregularities does nothing to further the goals and policies of the state of Montana, or for that matter, the city of Whitefish. As I've mentioned, the record owner of the land who signed the application has to consent to the ultimate plan that's approved by this body. Whitefish 57 from the inception has been a DBA, a doing business as designation. Later, for legal limited liability reasons, the applicant formed an LLC known as Whitefish Housing Group LLC and retained Whitefish 57 as a DBA designation. So the applicant hasn't changed from the inception. And I just want to make that clear. I want to talk for a few minutes about the standard of review, because I think that that's an important concept here. And I think it's one that we ought to clearly understand. Ms. Compton-Ring in her presentation showed you a chart. At the top of that chart was the reference to the growth policy. And I think it's important for us to keep in mind that a growth policy is a conceptual plan. And the Supreme Court of the state of Montana has made it very clear that conceptual plans are not regulatory documents. They're to be dealt with, as Ms. Compton Ring mentioned, at the 30,000-foot level, the highest level. And this is not the point in time where this body should be implementing the growth policy through development code considerations, including zoning or subdivision review or CUP review. That all comes at a later date in separate processes with separate public hearings, with much more detailed information than what's been presented this evening. And I think that relates directly to the comments that were made here about the wetlands and about bald eagles and about all of these other issues that down the line will have to be dealt with through the appropriate studies and mitigation measures, such as an environmental assessment, a more comprehensive traffic study, DEQ and DNRC considerations, and consideration of those regulations. The comment was also made that this body has never considered a sub-area plan before. And at least the way I heard it, the implication seems to be that because you've never considered a sub-area plan, you shouldn't do one tonight. But I'd point out to you that sub-area plans are simply an amendment to the growth policy. And your growth policy does a very detailed job and analysis of identifying the factors that go into that analysis. And so you have plenty of guidance here, plenty of guidelines within which to adopt an amendment to the growth policy. Now, I think what's interesting is that one of the written submissions that was previously made took the position that sub-area plans under Montana law are illegal. Did you read that? It's in a letter that was submitted to you. And I'm here to tell you tonight that sub-area plans are not illegal. That's a fiction, and you should disregard it. A sub-area plan is an amendment to the growth policy, and your regulations clearly point out the criteria that have to be met in order to pass a sub-area plan at a conceptual level. And I'm going to talk to you just for a moment, and I'll be brief, about the legal analysis. The Montana Supreme Court has been very clear about growth policy amendments. And I'm going to read to you a quote from the Montana Supreme Court in a recent case that was citing section 761601 that specifically provides, and I'm quoting, "The planning board may propose and the governing body may adopt additional elements of a growth policy in order to fulfill the purpose of this chapter." The Montana Supreme Court has made a directive and has stated that, quote, "To require strict compliance with the growth policy would result in a master plan so unworkable that it would have to be constantly changed in order to comply with reality. The master plan is, after all, a plan," unquote. The point I'm trying to make here is that the Supreme Court has laid down a test, and the test is that the amendment to the growth policy has to be consistent with the growth policy. That's the legal test. That's the case law in Montana. That's what your planning staff did. And what the detractors would have you believe is that you should take that planning staff report, which was carefully and thoughtfully completed, and discard it in its entirety and not pay any attention to it. And that if you do so, it's an arbitrary and capricious violation of the law. I'm here to tell you tonight that it's just the opposite. That planning staff report is well done, it's thoughtful, and it addresses the Montana Supreme Court's concern about amendments being consistent with the growth policy. And it explains that consistent with standard in detail. The other portion of the legal analysis, and I'm almost done here, and I just want to also say, I'm not here to lecture you tonight, okay? I hope that you find the information that I'm providing here to be helpful. And that's my purpose. And that you consider this to be information, strictly. The second criteria is the extraordinary community benefit criteria, which we've heard a lot about. I think we all recognize that the city of Whitefish has an affordable workforce housing crisis. And you've heard some of the good people who have stood up here tonight to give you the other side of the story, which is that we can't afford to live here anymore. We can't afford to raise our kids here anymore. And we're looking to you as trusted elected representatives of our city to fix this problem. There has been, throughout these proceedings, a lot of misinformation that's been presented about workforce housing as a part of this application as being a substantial community benefit. These developers are proposing to provide 10% of this project, to dedicate 10% of this project to affordable workforce housing. That's not a present requirement of the law. It's in addition to what the law would otherwise require. That is a substantial community benefit. They have also indicated, and they've told you, that if the law changes, and if there is a requirement for workforce housing imposed by the city, that they will add 10% to whatever that requirement is. So if they go through the CUP process and that requirement is 20%, they'll add another 10% to it. That's a significant benefit and a significant contribution by this developer to meet the substantial community benefit test. You know, finally, I'd like to point out that in terms of the substantial community benefit that this project has to offer, these developers, at their own expense, probably in excess of $1 million, have agreed to construct this extension of Baker Avenue. That is an important component to the transportation system of this city because it provides another north-south collector road to diminish traffic and congestion. This is not just for the benefit of this neighborhood or for this project. It's for the benefit of the community as a whole. So I'd like to thank you for letting me speak to you tonight. I know probably the last thing most of you want to hear is a lawyer stand up here and pontificate. I think what you need to do is elevate over the noise and consider this application on the merits based on the law. I think that oftentimes the emotional response or the emotional decision is the easy decision, but it's not always the right decision. So thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Van Cannigan. Can I just get a quick showing of hands who remain to provide some comment? Okay, we're going to go ahead and adjourn temporarily. We'll reconvene at 9:15.
decision's made, it's out of our hands and it goes to the council. So nobody's told me to shut up yet. I mean, I do frequently, especially if I'm really concerned about something else. I just want to make sure that the public process is going, so. That I get up and talk no matter what. Well, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really lovely that we have people that care so much about our city that they show up and they actually do, you know. Well, you just have to start somewhere. Like, I'm sure you're learning a lot being involved in this process about, you know, well, you know a lot about conservancies. Well, don't say that. Just say you're excited to be learning. Just say, I'm excited to be learning. Yeah, and it's all a learning process, you know. And that's why it's interesting when you get different attorneys having different opinions about what's legal, what's not legal, and then using the arguments to proceed or not proceed. But the best thing is that for the public to show up, because I think it generally slows things down when people show up and say they care, you know, but we'll see. And that's the best part about the public process. It's a lot of moving parts when we're growing a city, you know. But I think this is why we have a great city, is because people care enough to show up, and then things keep getting fixed until we get it right, and then we set precedents, and you know. Yeah. Well, I'm glad good luck. I've got to leave right after this because I've got my dog in the car. Long.
Sorry about the audio situation earlier. We tested before we started meetings. You know, basically what it was is the first amplifier.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'm glad they let you off for the night. Well, thanks for the work, what you're doing here. Okay, see ya.
I was like, was I not on an email chain or something?
I'm ready to speak. Okay. Hi, Melissa. Hopefully you guys will be out of here before midnight. I said, hopefully you'll be out of here before midnight. Yeah. At least the rest of the agenda's not bad.
We also have an aerial.
Oh yeah, no, I'm just, that's all. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not the most articulate person, but I think this really helped for you to do this. Yeah, I think you explaining it all, I think is really important, especially since different attorneys are questioning, you know.
We're gonna go.
I think it's good, so I'm gonna bring it up if I get to talk. Okay.
We're going to go ahead and get started. If folks could take their seats, please. Hi, Rebecca. We'll reconvene the council. We are back to item 6B, Resolution 18-23. We are still in the public hearing, and we have Rebecca.
Hi, you guys. Excuse me. Hello, council. My name's Rebecca Norton, 530 Scott Avenue. Someone asked if I get to speak because I'm on the planning board, and nobody has ever quieted me down yet. So I wanted to come tonight because I think this is a really important project for the city. I think we're getting much closer to what will probably work in the long run, but I do think you should continue it until we get more information. Sean Averill mentioned with Whitefish Crossing, I always get the names off once they're approved, that there was no adversarial discussions with the neighbors at that point, because I was on the planning board and I voted for that one. And the Park Knoll people worked with the developers often on that one until there was agreements about what would work for both that subdivision and Whitefish Crossing. But this has been a very different conversation with two subdivisions. So I think Wendy did the right thing in terms of presenting it as a sub-area plan. I just think the two previous times when we used that development tool, nobody had neighbors. I mean, nobody had neighbors on the river or up on Iron Horse, and so nobody was going to be immediately impacted if we passed something through, and so it became a neighborhood plan. But this time I think it should be slowed down. If it were me, I would choose that you wait until the corridor study is done, because we just finished the Wisconsin Avenue corridor and the DOT was involved the whole time with us. They came to one meeting, but they also read through all of our minutes, and they actually will be working with us on that corridor as it develops. And so they have to be involved in the planning process for safety's sake. And so I think if you let that committee do its job and either continue this later or table it till you have more information, it would be very helpful to the safety and the functionality of traffic. Another thing about the affordable housing, we've had projects come in that were 100% affordable. I think the one over by the wastewater. I mean, so we're starting to see a lot of people coming in with this carrot of affordable workforce housing. And so I think it's going to be happening now. And so I just think it will be happening, and you might as well take a little time to make sure the rest of the project is going to work for the neighbors and the long-term functionality of 93 South. I have really strong reservations about how the water moves through that area. When we first saw it on the planning board, the whole thing was covered with snow, so we really didn't know how big the wetlands were. And then they brought through an aerial photo, and it was pretty substantial. And so we still don't know if the area below the wetlands is going to be very buildable, because once you create impervious surfaces, the water does go somewhere. And so there's a lot of those kinds of things that I think the public that's going to be impacted immediately should have access to before permanently destroying someone else's property through trespassing of water. And that's why I was happy to hear the applicant coming in with a proposal possibly through the PUD process. We've used those for years now, and it does actually, it slows things down and it gives the public a lot of say in what the final build out is. So basically, I really love the public process, and I love learning new things all the time. But the one thing that really I think our town does well is when there's a lot of alarm, we take the time to listen, and we try to correct things before it's too late. And I think we're in that situation right now. You should take the time to continue or table until we know more what's going to actually be there. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Hey, so my name is Nick Amasiger. I live in 1970 4 Mile Drive, Kalispell, Montana. It's so nerve-wracking being up here with all these people. The first thing I want to say is I respect everyone's opinion. So everyone's opinions that have come up here and that have spoke, I respect every single one of you. I do not think it is a good idea to judge somebody's work ethic by the house that they have or the car that they drive. I think those are meaningless things to judge work ethic off of. I work extremely hard, and I would be the 21-year-old kid that people wouldn't want to be living in the house that these people are trying to build. And I'm an ACE certified personal trainer as well as a local manager here in Whitefish, and I love this town of Whitefish. As of September in 2018, I also have a fight camp with Team Alpha Male to become a UFC professional fighter. And so there's other young people like me that would love the opportunity to live in this town. And I know many people that are, and many of my colleagues and people that I surround myself with that would love to live in Whitefish, that they just can't physically afford it. And so if we had the opportunity to do that, that would be absolutely amazing, not just for me, but for the people that I know and love. So thank you for the opportunity for me to come up here and speak to each and every single one of you.
Thanks for your comments.
Council, how you doing? Jason Dunphy, 29 years old, born and raised in Kalispell, family, and majority of my friends are still here, and I spend a large majority of my time here and in Arizona as well, but specifically in Whitefish and Kalispell. And obviously, I think we can all agree there's a need for affordable housing. There's a shortage in inventory, and you know, specifically myself, I've been up here for work the last few years. You know, more than 6 months at a time. And obviously, we began renting, and rent has steadily gone up considerably over the last 3 to 4 years, obviously, because they can do that. I mean, it's obviously there's a shortage in renting and availability. So looking into buying, obviously, we discovered there was quite the shortage. And so I think, you know, to voice Mr. McCannigan's comments about, you know, conceptually speaking, I think there's definitely a need for housing, and the need needs to be addressed, whether it's, you know, obviously it's going to play out over the next, you know, whatever time frame that is, but I'm definitely an advocate for that, and I think it's a great thing for the city of Whitefish and the local economy in general. So, thank you.
Thanks, Jason.
My name is Bick Smith. 2451 Wolftail Pines. I'm sure glad I don't have your jobs up here. Everybody here wants workforce housing, but as you can see, not only here, but everywhere, nobody wants it in their backyard. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to talk about something else, and I was going to start it by saying I'm a local, and I thought, what's the definition of a local here? I've been here about 20 years. Am I a local now? I don't know. But anyway, I have real traffic concerns. And I, like a lot of people, have watched, I would say 15 years ago, we all talked about a bypass. And I don't think we actually put one in, I say jokingly, but I haven't even heard anybody talk about a bypass in recent years. There's lots of issues that relate to that, and I understand that. So bottom line, I have real traffic concerns. We have Highway 93 that comes from the south as 2 lanes, and thereby you know, Walgreens, it drops down to 1 lane, and then on the other side of town, when you get to the river, it goes back to 2 lanes again. You can understand why we have problems, and we're having problems. And I personally believe we're on the edge of a real traffic monster. And I'm sure everybody here this summer has kind of looked around and went, oh yeah, it's definitely picking up. And so I just wanted to make a comment that everybody that moved here or wants to move here came or is coming because they came from a place that had a traffic monster or whatever. I mean, all the people we know that, you know, sit in cars for an hour and whatever and do that kind of thing, none of us here want that. So I just wanted to say that personally, I use the Baker extension for my traffic, and I also think most locals do. And so my concern is, and my focus for the group is to say, guys, I heard earlier somebody talk about 2020 that we're going to start getting these extensions in place, but I think we really need as a community to focus on them. We've got obviously Columbia and Whitefish Avenue on the east and then Baker on the west. Bottom line, nobody that's living here wants to live with a traffic monster. So hopefully we can focus on this sooner than later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bick. Mary.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Community Unity Consulting, and I'm here tonight representing the applicant, South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. The handout that I just provided you is a summary of findings that are based on comments that have been in our comments in your packet. It's been updated somewhat. It certainly does not reflect the change that you have before you tonight, but it's provided for you to help supplement the comments that we've already made and to guide you as I go through my comments just now. I want to start off by saying that it is correct to say that the growth policy is a first step, but it is probably the most critical step. So this is the one that you need to really make sure you get right, because every other step you take has to be consistent with this step. It's also correct that a growth policy is non-regulatory, but a growth policy and the growth policy statute 761601, if you look at that, it's a long statute because it allows you to put a lot of detail into a growth policy. It does not say you have to stay at a very general level. It says you can be very much more specific, and it also says you can adopt neighborhood plans that provide more specificity. And I think in the state of growth that is occurring in Whitefish, you need that more detail, and I think it's highly appropriate to require it of a amendment for your growth policy. Secondly, I want to also say that the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association recognizes the importance of affordable housing and recognizes that this area is an area that has potential to provide housing needs to meet future growth in the city, as well as to be able to balance that additional growth with protection of critical wetland and drainage corridors and wildlife area that make up part of this area plan. And I want to just remind you that the confusion over this 70 acres is not minor, because the sub-area plan before you references development of recreational uses and clubhouses and whatnot in the entire area. And so the change that has been brought to you tonight is one you should not consider in this decision. We would strongly encourage you to send this back and to ask the developer to submit a new updated application so everybody sees in writing. The other thing that's really deficient in this plan before you is a lack of policies. And that's what you're going to go back to every time you come to zoning. You're going to say, well, what is the policy in this sub-area plan? And as I've shown you in prior handouts that I've provided you, there are very few scant policies to guide this plan, particularly on your affordable housing. There are almost no guidelines. If they want to do this as a PUD so there's more predictability, make it a policy. This will come back to you as a PUD. It doesn't have to otherwise. We need that kind of predictability in this development. So this first finding, and these findings mirror the 12 findings that are in the staff report, but reflect the record before you and provide support for the extensive comments that you have received that I believe document the need for denial. The proposed sub-area plan does not substantially further and promote the goals and vision of the growth policy because it is premature. It is a premature substantial change at a time when the South Highway Corridor Plan is critical and will be an update of your growth policy and is important to move forward to look at the comprehensive issues that plan will look at. As was pointed out by Lindsay, your growth policy has not been updated. And as was pointed out by, I believe, John Elliott on the planning board, despite repeatedly asking the planning staff to let them prioritize doing the 2-year update of your growth policy. That has not been put on their agenda. It's time to look at your growth policy more comprehensively before you move forward with a sub-area plan. I would also remind you that the 2018 Extension of Service Plan that you just adopted includes the following statement: additional water storage is needed on the south end of Whitefish to help equalize pressure to provide adequate fire flow capacity. The design process for a new water tank has been initiated. The storage tank is expected to be in place within the next 5 years. Again, there are a lot of pieces of a puzzle before this development can occur and before you need to make a final decision. So I think there is reason to say this is premature. You're well aware of the affordable housing policies. As fast as you would like to get those in place, I've heard it said that it's likely they won't be in place for at least 2 years. It's very likely this, if approved, this growth policy will come back for a zoning change, could be within 6 months, very quickly, and not be under those regulations. And I do hope that you took time to read the charts and the information I provided you just prior to this council meeting. And I think what's really revealing about that information is that most of the developments that have occurred along this corridor have occurred over low-density WR1 or B2 zoning. With blending, you've seen the problems, you've heard the issues, and our PUD regulations still allow for blending. So the density that can be gotten without increasing, without even applying a PUD is significant. Then you can apply a PUD, and through just reduction in lots, reduction in roads, variances on height, you can achieve almost the same density that you would in many of those zones without having to ask for the 20% bonus. If you don't have to ask for the 20% bonus, 10% of nothing is nothing. And so, again, as was said by prior folks, you had the Trailview subdivision come in here with 100% affordable commitment. They did that. They went through the whole PUD process, complied with it, and didn't even have to comply with that 20% affordability. But they came forward and voluntarily said, we're going to make this 50% income affordable, 50% local workforce requirement. This plan before you does not provide an extraordinary benefit because it does not include policies that put in place those kinds of assurances to know that the folks, and the really sincere folks who have spoken tonight before you about the desire to live here and to be able to have an opportunity to afford this, you need those kind of policies to know that we are actually going to secure the level of affordability that will allow them to live here. So that's what we're asking for, is more predictability. This is really a plan that is a lack of a plan. Over 50% of this has no plan for it. And to consider this as a whole, we have seen prior applications talk about housing on this back 70. We have not gotten a delineated wetland plan that we can look at and really base comments on. And so this is really a non-plan when you exclude over 50% of your sub-area plan from policies that will provide predictability. This plan also, and I don't think, if you look at these two red areas, there are significant portions, 4.15 acres of that is being added as additional commercial. There is no justification within this application, and it's their burden of proof, to show that you need to add additional commercial within this planning area. And what that does, it is allows, possible blending into areas where it's not appropriate. And maybe some of that 4 acres would be much more appropriate area to move any future high-density housing into those areas and to zone them more appropriately, or propose zoning more appropriate for that. Finding number 2, the proposed sub-area plan does not provide substantial community benefit because solutions for transportation have not been identified. The location of the highway entrance has been talked about. It's a major problem. And quite frankly, there has not been neighborhood discussion to really come together and look at possible solutions. That can probably be effectively done through the highway corridor plan, but it's certainly not, this plan is not ready for approval without it. Consideration of existing access points. While there's policy to say they should be combined, there's no detail showing that highway entrances will be reduced. The extension of Baker Road as proposed does not line up with the alignment in your transportation plan. And so the implications and the impacts of where that, how that will join up with other segments of the plan are not clear. The extension of JP Road, which is also part of your transportation plan, this plan now says that the developer will not extend that road, will not support any development of that road. And while we feel that there are really significant reasons given the wetland crossing proposed there, no alternative has been proposed. Finding 3, while the proposed sub-area plan provides on and off-site improvements and infrastructure will be installed at the time of development, this is not just expected to provide substantial community benefit. The traffic light, which is touted as perhaps relieving some traffic, this traffic study says that in one spot, but then in another it says that given the traffic counts, it's probably not even warranted that a traffic light will be required at this intersection. So who's going to pay for it if this development isn't, the development here alone isn't warranting it? The traffic study does not provide an adequate review of the cumulative impacts of all the development that's been approved in this corridor in recent years. And again, this is a place where your transportation highway corridor plan needs to be reviewed before you move forward. Finding 4, the proposal plan does not adequately set forth how it will avoid or effectively mitigate the environmental constraints. And I've already hit on this, both on the lack of the plan, but the setbacks that are touted as a benefit are what are already required in your standards. What is really missing is a comprehensive look at the delineated wetlands and really a plan to not make those a recreational paradise, but to make them a true water quality protection area and to limit the intrusion of human impact into that area to protect the wildlife and the water quality. But again, this policy lacks, plan lacks policies to provide that kind of direction. Again, the impact on joining existing neighborhoods will not be effectively mitigated. It has not been shown that the future housing needs of Whitefish are primarily need to be met by multifamily housing. There is, as you saw in the Trailview subdivision, it is highly possible to provide single-family housing, which is a high priority in the studies that you've produced for the community, and that needs to be looked at carefully, the ability to provide that kind of single-family housing to adequately meet the needs of the community. Again, it's been pointed out the future land use map doesn't show any high-density suburban, high-density residential on this west side of the highway. And so again, it's not compatible. The burden of proof lies with the applicant to demonstrate that in light of the development approved in the city already, that there is a clear need for the scale and the type of multifamily housing possible at the proposed density as opposed to additional single-family housing. And again, this could be achieved through more policy detail within the plan, which is simply missing. The communities, both neighborhoods, have expressed willingness to sit down and work on ideas for this. I think that is something that the Highway Corridor Plan can facilitate more community dialogue on the type of development along this corridor, and is probably an appropriate reason to, again, not accept this plan at this point. Again, finding 7, just because it's near existing facilities doesn't mean that it's an appropriate location, but the devil is in the detail of the housing needs, transportation needs, and things like water pressure. The staff report suggests that this growth policy amendment might be necessary because of inappropriate growth policy designations for both Great Northern Heights and Park Knoll. Both of these subdivisions are built out, almost built out, and have covenants protecting them. Changing the growth policy, correcting it on that, is probably more of a matter of housekeeping and not certainly an extraordinary need to amend our growth policy. We agree that there was no finding of specific area, and while we agree that conditions may have changed, this plan does not provide the policies to show that it is stepping up to meet some of those changes. And finally, the plan does not identify an extraordinary community benefit, which is what you really need to look at. The affordable housing is we applaud the fact that if they had to do 20%, they would do 30%, but that's the devil in the detail, and the policies aren't there to really assure that they have to comply with future designations without policies to say, in fact, as Trailview did, we're going to be there, we're committing. You can count on us. And that's not there, and that kind of detail needs to be. So in conclusion, you have a major change to the plan before you tonight. This plan needs to go back through the planning process so that those of us who have spent hours poring over this, trying to understand it and analyze it, we'll have yet another opportunity to really look at the implications, and so that this applicant can be challenged to come back with much more meaningful policies that will really commit them to providing the kind of affordable housing and quality growth and protection of our critical areas that is necessary for this plan to be an extraordinary benefit to this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary.
David Hunt, 113 Park Knoll Lane. Mary's a hard act to follow. I can't top her on content ever, but I can deliver on brevity. So I'll focus on that. In the packet, Park Knoll Lane submitted another letter to you, which appears very deep, I think page 781 of 799 pages that you've received. In that letter, there's a chart that shows the evolution of this development. There are so many iterations, so much confusion, and yet a new ingredient tonight that I'm lost. I don't know where you all stand with all the changes that have gone on, but I think that we would benefit by continuing this discussion at another time. The chart that you have before you here, Mary talked about the red areas where there's commercial zone. Not revealed to us earlier was that those areas had been expanded asking for 2.9 more commercial acres in the red area in the top, 1.25 more commercial areas in the area on the bottom. And I didn't find any explanations from that from the applicant, nor in the staff report. And I think an increase like that of over 4 acres in commercial zone would be important for you to know. So things like that, plus the number of changes, I think it's premature for us to have meaningful comment on the latest round of changes tonight. And I encourage you to send this back so that we can all understand what we're trying to comment on. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. Cheryl.
Cheryl Watkins, 143 Old Morris Trail. I'm just going to admit right up front that I'm pretty ignorant about everything. Just there. But all these people are pretty smart about what they've been saying. So I'm just going to follow up on a few things that we've talked about in the South neighborhood meetings and with the attorneys. I emailed the council last week requesting that you listen to the audio, both planning board meetings on these projects. I truly don't think you're doing any due diligence if you haven't, because I read what the handwritten notes were. They don't give you any detail about what was said. The lady said disagreed. It's nothing. It's nothing to what the details were in the planning board meetings. And the public, it's just very disheartening to the public to think that you as the council would not have listened to those audios and just read the transcripts. The South Whitefish Neighborhood Association has two attorneys. Mary's our consultant, and we have hired a hydrologist who is in the process of doing the wetland report. When we finish it, we did a flyover last Saturday, and when we finish our report, we'll send you a copy so you have it, and I'm going to send the Flathead County Planning head a copy so that if this comes back and they're down there tomorrow morning because you've okayed this project, they're going to have our wetland plan. Their wetland plan, I'm pretty sure, consisted of a flyover, but pretty sure it consisted of leaning on the car hood at the top of JP Road and saying, yep, it looks like a wetlands. They did not submit a report with their application. Has anyone seen one? We haven't had access to one. This application for the second planning board meeting, have you looked at it? It's dated December 12th. There were no additional staff meetings. There were no payments. There are no signatures on this. No signatures. Nobody signed this second application. But down here in this little footnote, I am pretty good at reading footnotes. May be signed by the applicant or representative. An authorization letter from the owner must be attached. Y'all seen any of that? Nope. We haven't seen it. The attorneys sent a letter dated June 13th, another one on June 27th. Part of the planning board didn't even read that second letter. What can I say about that? It's just wrong. I've talked to 2 past board members or committee members. I've talked to 2 current people on boards. They have felt that the planning staff is letting applications like this slide through. They call it sliding, I call it favoritism because of all the lack of what is in this application. Then there's the legal notice. Pardon?
Can you just speak more into the microphone?
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Cheryl, just for the record. Thank you.
There is a legal notice in the pilot on June 6th. The last planning board meeting was the 21st. That gave the public, between the planning board and this meeting, 6 working days and 18 total working days. The illegal application and lack of time adding to the planning board limiting our speaking time was of interest when I called the governor's office last week. 444-3111. You can call the governor's office. the members of the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association, Park Knoll, and Great Northern Heights, 3 attorneys, and the consultant, who is Mary, met last week. David Hunt has figures, I don't know why he didn't give them, about how massive this development would be. The developers are, it says right in here, we don't have a concept. And to me, this is just wrong to even off the get-go, even though I realize, oh, and they didn't show us that 5-level plan until last week in the second board meeting. So people like me who are very ignorant of how this works were astounded to all of a sudden see 5 different layers going up there when that wasn't shown to us in the first planning board meeting. So that's another problem I have with it. Secondly, JP Road is still in this plan all over the place. And Luke's have given me permission to say that they are never going to have, it's in 2 or 3 places in here, that they're still going to push JP Road through eventually to Blanchard Lake Road. You're going to have to condemn, buy that property or something, because Luke's are never going to give you permission. This leads to the back 30 wetlands. It is still very loosely worded in here. Here's the long-range transportation. Here's the wetlands, still in here, even though they say they're not going to do anything right now. Richard pointed out in the very first meeting that even if they decide to use it, and the county, I talked to the county guy this morning, Mark, they don't have enough to mitigate it. It's still SAG 5 unless you annex it. So they only can get 5 houses. Richard also pointed out in the first meeting that there's not enough setbacks there for doing whatever they originally produced. I also know that in here they talk about a clubhouse and a swimming pool. Now, on Wisconsin sits the Murdoch 200 acres conservation easement. When a clubhouse appeared on Wisconsin with all of the parking lots and everything else, the Murdoch property is now flooded. And I don't see any reason for them to put a clubhouse in the back or a swimming pool and flood that wetlands property back onto mine or further down the road. Furthermore, I have made 2 offers to buy that back 30. I made one to a verbal offer to a family member. When we got no response, the attorney sent a registered letter to Marie. It was signed for by someone with power of attorney, which brings up the point, where's Marie? No signature. The registered letter doesn't have her signature. Where's Marie? Don Kay spoke for her last week. He didn't have a letter in the application to talk for Marie. Is she competent? Is there legal abuse? We don't know. Where's Marie? And finally, Lindsay did not say the sub-plan was illegal. Rebecca Norton in the last meeting pointed out that this is the first time a sub-area plan has been introduced. Lindsay only pointed out that you need to review the plan legally before you can use the sub-area plan. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Cheryl. Dick.
Dick Zollner, 1365 Borman. It seems to me I've been up here for the last 6 months just listening to everybody complain about traffic problems. And it's not just this development, it was over there on the other side of the viaduct, Vorman Road. Now this problem, you can only push so much water through a pipe unless you can put pressure on it, and we're not gonna go faster through this town. And I think you guys or gals are supposed to be the leaders of this community. We've got to figure out what we're going to do with traffic. There's more people coming here, and it's always going to be a traffic problem. And the other problem I'm seeing is we're a tourist town. We decided that back in the 90s. And we got rid of industry. And now we're getting all these low-wage jobs, and we're having this problem of housing for workforce housing. And I think the town needs to step up and say, maybe we need to look at something different than tourism to help these young people. I hear people get up all the time and say, my kid can't live here. Well, we're adults. Let's fix that problem and get some jobs where they can make a living and people can get into their own house. But I think you guys got a lot of stuff ahead of you, and all these developments are going to be the same. It's going to be a traffic problem, or it's going to be high-rise buildings for these people to be living in, and nobody in town really wants it. It's not like you don't want the people. You don't have a problem with the people, but we've got problems that you have to deal with. You guys are the leaders. Try to do something about this traffic. Roger said it earlier in the meeting. They're trying to do that project south of town, but you've got to figure out what we're going to do with traffic. Thank you.
Good evening, 10 o'clock, bedtime. My name's Karen Giese. I live at 121 Park Knoll Lane. I had planned on starting another way, but right now I would like to point out that I don't believe anybody from Park Knoll or the Great Northern subdivision ever said that they didn't want the affordable housing. It was always about density. For some reason tonight, compared to the planning meetings, we had all these people stepping forward, which my heart goes out to them because I've been there too. They want to come back to Whitefish. They want to live here. I don't blame them. But where were they during the planning meetings? Why all of a sudden are they saying, you know, we have good income, but we can't afford to live here? Well, if they have good incomes, they're not going to get affordable housing. They're going to be paying the amount that, you know, like Whitefish Crossing, I'm just using it as an example, and all over your sea rent is around $1,300 for a 2-bedroom. Whitefish Crossing starts 1 bedrooms at $1,230. So if they have good income, they're not going to get affordable housing. But I hope that every single one of them that wants to move back to Whitefish can do it, and those that are the lower income can somehow move into these. Whitefish Crossing has 6 units out of 60 that are affordable. The rest are all up higher. But I am excited for the young people to come back to Whitefish because they are our future. The other thing I want to point out is that I believe that the confusion that continues to come from this addendum to the growth plan, by them making this change at the very end, we need to take it back off the table. We need to find out what it means. What does WR1 or whatever the ratings are, what does that mean for if you have a PUD that's added to it? What does that really mean for density? And I know we're at the very top. I've been in the government all my life. I know how this planning process works. And I believe that it's important that we be slow at the first process and that you, as our elected officials, lead us down the right path with this. Because if once we start going down here and then all of a sudden they're like, well, the PUD still says you can have over 500 and some people living in there. Well, then what we've done is we've taken this development that was presented to us at 2 different meetings as high density, a little bit of residential, and some commercial, which could be converted to high density. All those pictures that we saw are gone, and now it's a concept. And so as we talk about this concept and they've expanded the commercial area, we don't know what's going on with the wetlands. We don't know what they take the high density off. We don't know what all that means. We need to step back and we need to come up with that. And the other thing that I just kind of want to point out is that we're talking about a developer that has a lot of history in Whitefish, some really great things that have been going on. One of the planning board members said, sometimes we just have to act with faith. And he believed that this developer could be trusted and would go forward the way that they said that they're going to, although it's only a concept, so whatever direction that is. So I just want to go back in time a little bit. The same developers that built Whitefish Lake Lodge convinced the city council that they should have a walkway over Wisconsin Avenue and that it would be a great safety feature for the public that would be accessing their building. So they could park on the other side and then they could access it. Do you guys remember that? And then once the building was, all the construction was done, guess what? That walkway is only for the patrons of the hotel that are staying there. It's not for the public. So a little deception there. Then we have Firebrand, which is a beautiful hotel, and it's,
With all due respect, let's stick to the merits of the application in front of us and not single out the developer or the applicant's
I'm just
history
pointing-
in the town.
okay, I'm pointing
Please.
out that every time the developer says this, something else happens. And I would like to, I know that has nothing to do with the addendum here, but we still have to look at the fact that if you give them an inch today with adding this addendum, without looking at it very closely, we're going to give them a mile. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments. Rhonda.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. I did read the almost 800 pages and made some notes, and now I come to find out that there's a different plan being proposed, so I will just make some very general comments. Wendy showed you the funnel for planning, and at the top is a growth policy amendment, and I think that that's a great thing to keep in mind because after that, the train leaves the station. And how many times have we been here and you guys have been basically kind of, well, we're pretty far down the process now and we're locked in. So I think you should take the time at that first step before the train leaves the station so you're not locked into some things that are really not good for the community. I think some of the modifications that have come forward over the processes and the many meetings are improvements. But the idea of pulling off the WR4 and making it R1 or R2 sounds good, and I would hope that would be the solution, but then in the same breath they said, because we'll just do a PUD to get the high-density multifamily. So it's just it's kind of an end around because they're still going for the high-density multifamily, but they'll call it R1 or R2 and get you guys to approve it, and then they'll come back for the PUD. I think that that multifamily high density in that location is probably not appropriate, and perhaps there's a way for you to approve actual R1, R2, and in my perfect world, that would be housing that's affordable for the people who live and work here. I'm very concerned that somehow or other this got presented tonight as affordable housing. It's not. 10% of almost 700 potential units is a lot of units, but it's a lot more that aren't. And it would be great if developers were building housing for the people who live and work here. That's what our affordable housing is calling for. The area median income, that's the median of what people make, and up to 150% of that area median income all qualifies as affordable housing. That's a household income of $78,000. There are a lot of people in Whitefish who make $78,000 or less. They would qualify for those affordable housing homes. And I think this is something that's totally not understood. It's not about multifamily, high-density apartments for rent. That's not what the community is asking for. They're asking for modest homes they can buy. That's what the people who came here tonight are asking for. And it would be great if this project could become that. It would solve the problems of the subdivisions around it. It would solve the problem of people who live and work here not being able to afford homes. It would give the developer a saleable housing product, and it would just be a win-win all the way around. But it's going to take a little more work, and I hope that maybe the neighboring subdivisions could get together with the developer and talk about something that really will work for the community, including logical transportation solutions. The other thing I really have an issue with is expanding the B2. We already know we have too much B2 for a community our size. Why in the world would we increase it? I don't get it. And I think that that got kind of slipped in and is really inappropriate. In order to amend the growth policy, you're required to provide substantial community benefits, plural. I'm not seeing any, and I do not think 10% affordable housing, which I saw in one document, they referenced maybe Habitat for Humanity. That's not what we need in our community. That's not the kind of affordable housing we're working for. And so I would hope that you could send this back, get it worked some more, and figure out something that is a very good use of this land and solves what the community needs and creates a saleable product that is consistent with the other neighborhoods around it. And then, you know, my bugbear, short-term rentals. Whatever you do, make sure that this cannot be short-term rentals because there are way too many of them and they are a cancer on our community. They're a menace. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Bruce Haller, 5450 Highway 93 South. I come here tonight as an outsider looking in a way. I left this community out of Kalispell 34 years ago when I joined the Army. Prior to that, Dave Morris, a good friend of my grandfather, Bert Haller, took me for a ride back on his property. And I'm familiar with the family. I've been on the property. There is wetlands there. Northern Lights was also built on a wetland, and that's why people have the problems with all the sump pumps built into their housing there. If we ask Dave Morris if what we see up there as a development that is now today was his desire of his neighborhood, he would have said no. He loved what he had. He loved being able to go for horseback rides and be out in the wild. But Whitefish is changing. We are now a high community with the primary goal of having tourists come in and support us, which is an awesome endeavor. We have heard tonight continually that traffic is a problem. Anywhere you go, that there is tourism coming in, you're going to have a big problem with traffic. No matter where it is. Even if you go up into Colorado and their ski resorts, they have big problems up there with the traffic. So if our issue is we don't want the traffic, what we're saying is we don't want the revenue that we're getting from the tourists that come here. So we do need to find a way to expand it so we can facilitate the travel. The other thing about housing, we do have a huge problem for the housing here. And this concept makes sense. It has went through some changes. And as we listened to Wendy tonight go over that, she took you through the process of where it started to where it is now. All these changes have come because we have listened to the board. The developers have listened to the board and said, hey, this is our concern. We're going to find a way to fix it. So it does make sense. But we say we want the community, and part of that is reaching out. In the Army, I was taught, if you come with a problem, don't throw gas on the fire. Come with an answer. Don't say, hey, we don't want this because there's going to be too many people here, but find a way to make it work. And as leaders tonight, that's what you're charged with. Finding a way that this can work, coming back to the developer and saying, we like where you're going, but yeah, maybe you do need to say, hey, think about changing this. We're going to approve it, but we're going to put a restriction on this or a restriction on that. Make it so it's a gain for you as a community and a gain for the developers, a gain for us, the people of Whitefish.
Thanks, Bruce.
Don Kaltschmidt, 230 JP Road, Whitefish, Montana. I'd like to speak tonight as a citizen of Whitefish, as the managing partner of Eagle Enterprises, and also as the owner of Don K. Whitefish. First, as the owner of Don K. Whitefish. I did a poll here recently. I had my HR director reach out to each one of our employees and look where they lived. They all work in Whitefish, obviously. We have over 100 now. And 30% of them live in Whitefish. And I think you've heard enough tonight to know why that is. Now, as a citizen, I understand the passion that we've heard from my neighbors here. And I call them my neighbors because we all live in this great town. And I understand their concerns, I do. I had the same concerns. I live in a rural area right across from the riverside. When that came to fruition, I didn't like that very much either because my area is rural. It's right across the river. And they have housing, they have multi-housing, and we have baseball fields and soccer fields. And I didn't think that was pretty good at the time. I was a lot younger then. But now, when I look back on it, I was wrong. It's good for the community. The subdivisions turned out fine. Sure, my neighbor can't shoot ducks anymore. It's a great flyway down the right Whitefish River. That doesn't happen anymore, as the gentleman just told you. Our community's changing, but it hasn't really ruined my living. But I understand how people might think that. Now, if we look at the plan as a managing partner of Eagle Enterprises, the reason that we went in with Whitefish 57, if you will, because we looked at this as being a solution for whitefish. That is a long corridor of a potential Baker Avenue from the beginning of the LDS Church clear over to JP Road. And if that isn't a major community benefit, I don't know what is. Think about this for a minute. The developers are not only saying that they'll give you the land, but they're going to build you the road. That's a lot of community benefit. And it's been said in other meetings that this thing is a concept that won't happen for years. It's going to happen. There is the way forward. Now, I think the community of Whitefish has done an excellent job in looking at our future. And this is a future project here, if you look at it. It's really not a project. That's the other thing. This is just a plan, and you're going to have many more bites at the apple. You already know that. But if you look at it, Whitefish has done a great job. We got Shiloh right behind the dealership. You got Baker over here, and we're going to need that flow over the years if we talked about traffic. The other thing common sense tells me, if not here for this type of zoning, where? If you go over the east side of the dealership on that side, you'll see that same kind of zoning all up and down there. And it's worked pretty good except for one thing. And that is when you have hard commercial next to residential, and I know this because I've dealt with my neighbors, even though we were there first, doesn't work so good. That extra commercial that you hear everybody talking about, that could be used for some buffer area. What could that be? Maybe multifamily housing, I don't know. Maybe if it's economically prudent, maybe some office buildings to have a buffer between something's hard commercial like a dealership and that building project. So, in those office buildings. So I think this really makes a lot of sense. And I want to remind you that you don't represent Whitefish 57. You don't represent just Eagle Enterprises. You don't represent Park Knoll, just Park Knoll or Great Northern. You represent the entire community of Whitefish, Montana. And you have to ask yourself, if not here, where? And is this best for Whitefish? Thank you very much. I hope you support the project.
Thank you, Don. Is there any further public testimony on this item tonight? Yes, sir.
Hi, Robert James, 132 Park Knoll Lane. Excuse me. I thought I'd avoid having to come on up here after I saw some fine people coming up earlier, and the one thing I was really thrilled with is common sense was breaking out at this meeting, and I quite enjoyed hearing it. And but after the last talk, I just had to come up and bat cleanup because I have to go on record and say I'm quite opposed as to what I see on the wall there as a development, as if it is a development. It's so so fractured that it's just hard to figure out what it is. I just heard that we're going to get a road for free from the church, the Mormon church, down to the intersection there. But that's a road to nowhere. And I can tell you, I have seen roads to nowhere, and they go nowhere. Where does that road go beyond the borders of that property and being paid for by the developer? I don't see that happening. So I just point that out. And I also just want to wish you all great success in coming to grips with what's happening, because this is a very pivotal point in Whitefish's history right in front of us right now as to where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And all I can say is we need some thought and planning on how to get there right, because I think everybody in this room loves this town, and we all want to see it done right, whatever it is. I wish you the best.
Thanks, Robert. Further testimony on this item? Last call for public testimony. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Thank you for your participation and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion to help move things along. Richard.
I have a question for Wendy, maybe more than one.
Please.
Could you clarify, please, whether or not the eastern 35 approximate acres that is primarily in wetlands is or is not included in the proposed plan before us?
Yeah, I guess I understood it was part of the 70-acre sub-area plan, but only the 35 acres was being amended. Only the area highlighted in the bright color is being amended. And the remainder is going to stay the exact same, so they're not proposing to make any changes to those land use designations.
But it is or is not included in the sub-area plan?
That's, I understood it is in the sub-area plan, just not proposed to be changed.
It will remain suburban and rural land use designation.
And mostly in the county. You can see the city limits on the map that's up there. The pink line is the city limits.
Okay. Would the Baker extension be required in any proposal?
I guess the way to think about this too is, there are, 4 or 5 different parcels that make up this entire sub-area plan. If, say, development of just one portion of that came in, if they just came in and built a gas station, it'd be difficult to exact a road out of someone who's just building a gas station. If they came in and did a subdivision, there could be a little bit more nexus that could require, but again, it'd be very piecemeal. It'd be kind of how we've been seeing it on the other side of the road where, the Riverview Meadows came in and they did their little section, little section, little section. Here, they're proposing the entire corridor without having a direct, link to that requirement.
Okay. If in that proposed or suggested, I guess, extended commercial area, the two roughly 6-acre parcels, Don Kay suggested that that addition that has been made could be a buffer, a high-density housing, or offices. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Can you address, or is this going to be Angie, lack of signatures, people who are or are not interested parties in all of this? That seems to have been a major sticking point all the way through the discussion this evening.
Yeah, there's
I'd
a
love
signature.
some clarity.
There's a signature page for both Marie Hedman and for Don Kay in the application.
In the original application or
And the updated one that's dated April 22nd, 2018,
Okay, and
and April 29th, 2018.
okay, and what page is that on, Wendy, in our packet? Do you know?
It's the front 2 pages of the growth policy application.
And that is included in
Well,
our packet?
maybe Michelle has a better way of looking at it. I didn't print out the whole thing, so I had your exact same page numbers. Yeah, it'd be towards the beginning. It'd be after the staff report, probably. After the minutes. I could come show you if you'd like to see. I have the paper copies if that's helpful.
Sure, but if we could project it, that might alleviate some question or issue.
Want me to project it?
Yeah. Please. Anybody else want to take a look at this?
Seen it.
I think what it is I give you a digital copy that's not signed, and then I give you the originals in your paper.
Great, thank you, Wendy.
Mr. Mayor, I think there's a point of order at this order of the meeting. We're now out of public comment, and I think we need to move forward with what we're doing.
Richard, further questions?
I don't think so.
Frank?
Mr. Mayor, though it pains me to do so, given the, what I'm perceiving as the indecision and all of this searching through the changes in this, I would move that we table this matter to a date certain 2 weeks from now so that we can all digest the changes that have been made. I do that, if you want me to
Let's
speak
wait
to
for
that.
a second. So it's a motion to postpone this matter to the July 16, 2018 meeting of the City Council. Is there a second to the motion for discussion? Seconded by Councilor Fury. Now, Frank.
It pains me to do so. I know that many, if not all, of the changes that have been made to this proposal have been made by the developer based on direct input from this community. I'm frustrated that their response in trying to work with the community and be responsive to the community has been met with, to some degree, with a question of confusion. That being the case, that's the reason I moved to table at this time. I think what pains me to do it is that we're all obviously searching for the right way to approach this. I think we, by having to do this at this time, do some damage to our supposed request of our developers to work with the community and to be responsive to their concerns. Nothing's perfect, but and so it's with that I move to table, and hopefully in 2 weeks everybody can digest the responsiveness of this developer to their requests, and trying to in fact hear the community. So that's my motion.
Motion is to postpone to the July 16th meeting. That motion has been seconded. Any further discussion on this matter? Andy?
I kind of echo Frank's comments. I don't really want to continue the long, slow, painful root canal without Novocaine any longer for anybody, and had we not received what we received on Friday, I probably would have looked at it much differently and not seconded your motion and probably would have voted against it. But I think there is some valid argument that what was proposed as a change, both in presumed change in area of the WB2 and then a reduction in the density in area 3 down to WB1 or W1, WR1 and WR2. I think that does merit some further look by us as a council and certainly by the neighborhood as a whole. I do have to take exception with some of the things that were said tonight, and I won't go into those specifically, but I think there's been a certain amount of confusion that's been used by both sides, and I would argue that that's not good for anybody in this purpose, and I think that Frank's right. I think the developers have listened to the neighborhood. Have they come back with a perfect plan at this point? No, I don't think they have. I will argue also that someone from the opposition to the plan said that growth policies are something that should be looked at as a community as a whole, and I firmly and wholly believe that. I've supported that my entire 20 years sitting up here. The whole community is not only Park Knoll, as Don Kay said, and it is not only Great Northern Heights. The whole community is the whole community, and the only people I heard here in opposition to it tonight, for the most part, were from those two neighborhoods. So I can't take that as the whole community speaking. I can take that as concerned neighbors speaking, but I'm not going to take that at face value that it's for the entire community. I think we would be doing a disservice, and you would not probably want us sitting up here if that's the way we looked at a project that didn't affect you in the same way. So I hope everybody takes the 2 weeks to get a little saner heads and think about it and come back and we revisit it. And I will say one other thing, just because I hate misinformation. Cheryl said that they never contended that this could not be done, and I will quote from page 455. It was a letter dated from both Michelle and Lindsay on March 14th, and it says, and I am quoting here, additionally, under the growth policy, a sub-area plan is a growth policy amendment mechanism, oh, my computer died there, distinct and separate from neighborhood plan, because only neighborhood plans are recognized under state statute. The association contends that the growth policy cannot be amended in this sub-area plan. So it was the contention that we can't do this. And I take it on very good advisement from our city attorney that it's something that we can do. And if there's one thing I've learned from my time with Angie here so far, is her years spent defending this city for the MMIA in her private practice. She is very cautious, and she really looks out for us and does never want to see us get into any kind of litigation. And so she tells me we're okay doing it. I'm going to trust her 100%. So there you go.
Thank you, Andy. One clarification on the motion, Frank. Was that motion, did it keep the public hearing open or closed for our July 16th meeting?
I would move to leave it open, given that the reported new information was a surprise.
And that's okay with the second?
Is that okay with you, Andy?
I'm thinking about that.
Oh.
Yes, fine.
We will keep the public hearing open for the July 16th meeting. However, I will warn you that I may restrict public comment or limit public comment for the spirit of keeping things moving along, unlike this evening. Further discussion on the motion? Richard will be gone. And Katie might be gone. It's not an ordinance, it just requires a simple majority vote of the council, so as long as we have 4 members present, as well as myself, I plan to be here, we can move the business right along. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and the motion carries on a 4-2 vote with Councilor Williams and Hennon voting in opposition. Thanks all for attending. I know it was a late night, but we certainly appreciate your participation this evening. What's that, Richard?
Be down to Heidi.
It's just, I wish I could be here, but I'm in Colorado. Obligation I made.
Postpone again. We're going to go ahead and move on to item 7A, ordinance 18-22, an ordinance of the city of Whitefish, Montana, establishing a procedure for disposition of unclaimed tangible personal property that comes into possession of the Whitefish Police Department, and this will be on a first reading. Angie.
I promise to be extremely brief. This is just basically housekeeping. Or law enforcement agencies sometimes come into possession of property that's evidence, or it's stolen property that no one's claimed. And there hasn't, well, I think years ago there was a statute that kind of set forth how police agencies could get rid of this stuff that is just kind of lying around. I understand we have a rather large store of bicycles somewhere in the city that they've been hanging on to. So in 2017, the Montana League of Cities sponsored some legislation which allows cities to pass ordinances basically providing for the disposal of abandoned property. And it was passed. I think both Great Falls and Helena have done it, and again, it's just kind of a little bit of housekeeping that defines how and when our police station can purge their selection of bicycles. And basically, the proposed ordinance just models the statute. It allows the Whitefish PD to dispose of all unclaimed personal property having a value more than $20 by any appropriate means. After 3 months, they can donate it, they can sell it, they can get rid of it. And it basically says they'll attempt to notify owners by placing just a list of unclaimed property on their website 4 times a year. And before they get rid of it, they'll just do a newspaper notice. So the owner, if any, does have some way of obtaining their property back. So there's no significant financial impacts, and again, it just may allow them to purge some of the stuff that they've been sitting on and create some room. So staff does recommend that the city council adopt the ordinance, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ange. Any questions for Angie?
Does that revenue return to the general fund?
That's a Dana question.
We don't control what happens in the lobby, Cheryl. I apologize that that happened. Richard?
Yes, so the funds could, it would be dependent upon really the direction of where we'd go. Generally, probably to the police fund. I know in the past though, you know, Parks and Rec has also, you know, used the bikes, so I'm not quite sure how that would work out between the two. But it would, both general, police and parks are all property tax supported, so.
Okay, thanks.
Katie?
I would like to make a motion. Please.
Really?
Yeah, I move to approve ordinance 18-22, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Whitefish, Montana, establishing a procedure for the disposition of unclaimed tangible personal property that comes into possession of the Whitefish Police Department.
Second.
Great.
Seconded by Councilor Hildner. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that carries unanimously. Michelle? Thanks, Angie. We'll move on to item 8A. You have Adam's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Adam? Adam, anything additional to report on?
The only thing I want to point out a little bit on is the training and tabletop exercise set for October 9th and 10th. I'm going to be sending out an email to kind of lay out a few more of the particulars as I learn them, but to kind of give everyone a bit of a heads up and time to prepare would be great if as many of the council and the mayor could be for the training and that tabletop exercise, the better. That would be great, but you'll see more info coming.
October 8th and 9th, correct?
9th and 10th.
9th and 10th, excuse me.
Yep, it's a Tuesday, Wednesday.
Okay. Move on to item 9A, which will be resolution 18-23, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Whitefish amending resolution 18-05. Andy, would you like to handle this, or, excuse me?
24.
24, excuse me.
Oh, 25.
No, it's 23 because item 6B.
We have annexation resolution, which is actually 1823. That's in the consent.
Okay.
And then 1824 would be this next one since we tabled the.
Okay.
So 1824.
Thanks, Michelle. Resolution 18-24. I don't know who wanted to cover this topic since you're on the committee, Andy?
Yeah, Michelle ran me down to the post office today and said, do you want to do it or do you want me to? And I said, I could go ahead and do it. And I said that, as you all recall, we did talk briefly about it at our retreat. And the idea being here, and we thought as a committee, part of the problem we run into is we say tour master plan steering committee, people are thinking we're just working on how to bring more people here, and that's not what we're doing 100%. Our idea is to figure out how we manage it and sustain it, grow it in a responsible manner so it doesn't crush us like the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And so that's the message, and that's why we thought it would be best if we changed the name of the committee.
Great. Motion? While you're at it?
I lost the dialogue on the numbers there, though.
18-24.
I would move that we adopt resolution 18-24.
Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Williams. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. That's unanimous. Michelle, which brings us back to communications from myself and the city councilors. Richard, would you like to start?
Sure. I would, and it's probably a question for our police department and public works to address in some fashion. Tessa Pittman's request of speed limits on Dakota. It doesn't seem to make much sense to me that it's 15 miles an hour where there are sidewalks, and where there's no sidewalk, they can drive 25 miles an hour on Dakota. And I think some additional signage might be helpful. And if we have we could maybe move that mobile speed, digital speed, just so people could get an idea how fast they are or are not going. If there's a safe place to put that, at least temporarily, to see if we can't slow people down a little bit on Dakota. Secondly,
Before you move on, was there a general showing of hands to have the police department look into that issue? Okay, I see 6 hands. Thanks, Richard.
I think Public
And
Works.
Public
is
Works
gonna
as well,
have to-
excuse me.
Because signage is going to have to be involved there at some point, I think. Secondly, I thought that Neil Malkasian had several good ideas with regards to fireworks, and not the least of which was perhaps we could have a temporary reader board at each entrance to the city in the days leading up to fireworks sales, to just say fireworks prohibited in the city of Whitefish July, or permitted only July 3 through 5. I think that might be helpful. And then, as I have done in the past, I would like to see us eventually get to a point where we can join our fellow communities, Columbia Falls and Kalispell, and prohibit fireworks altogether, given that we have probably the biggest fireworks display in the valley, right at City Beach. And perhaps on the city's website, make it very clear during the 4th of July period that fireworks are permitted only in a short period of time in the city.
Something to think about for next year, perhaps?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Andy? Thanks, Andy. Ryan?
A friend of mine owns a business here in town, and he said he had an issue to deal with the city. I think it was last week, and he had nothing but great things to say about every staff member he came into contact with. So I just wanted to say, keep up the good work. I hear great things.
Thanks, Ryan. Katie?
Well, Richard covered Dakota. Happy 4th of July.
Thanks, Katie. Frank?
Nothing for the city.
Thanks, Frank. Melissa?
Nothing further.
Given the late hour and the fact that we probably won't bring the impact fees back for a public hearing until early October, would it be okay if we just address or provide direction back to staff at our next meeting? Just so we don't have to go into that topic right now. It's been a late night.
Yeah, I think just working with the only issue I see is that FCS Group, their contracts run out, and June 30th was the last date that they were contracted with us. So if we're gonna have them make changes to the report, we would probably want to get those sooner. But again, I'm not sure that the next meeting will be all that earlier than tonight. It could be. Really, I just want more for them, and the only direction that they would need is that local data versus state data, because otherwise there's no changes to the report. So if I could just, get a sense of that.
I mean, my personal opinion is local data that's more representative of our community and our needs. I mean, that makes sense to me versus being globbed in with the entire state.
Okay.
I don't know what the council feels, but seeing 6 head nods, so perhaps.
Yeah, we'll just make
Local
that
data.
change at that point, and then all the other stuff is more for a council decision and staff preparation.
Okay,
That's
do we
fine.
need to add that for an agenda item under
Adopting the
councilor
report.
comments?
I'm not gonna have, sorry.
Just in terms of direction back to staff on what assessments we're wanting to proceed with, given the recommendations you made tonight.
Yes, I would like direction though at the next meeting for those items, yeah. And I could list out the questions that I have.
Okay,
Yeah.
maybe place that under a report from
Yeah,
yourself?
I could just
As an
do it.
agenda item? Okay, great, thanks. Just a quick update, I should have brought this up under volunteer boards, although I'm not formally on a volunteer board with Legacy Partners anymore, but we did have Federal Highways, Western Lands Division in from Washington this past week, and also representatives from the U.S. Forest Service, both the DC office and the Flathead National Forest. These folks were engineers and program specialists with the Federal Lands Access Program. Annually, FLAP, which is a project that I think Maria's certainly explained to us before. It's a program that provides funding to municipalities, governments, county, state, et cetera, for projects that increase public access to federal land. So it's on the docket of one of the potential funding sources to help with the close-the-loop improvements in terms of infrastructure. So FLAP can be used for trailheads, bridges, informational, signage, et cetera. Every year they give out about $17 million to the state of Montana alone. The Blacktail Road's being reconstructed with FLAP. They did a major project out at Lost Trail National Wildlife Refuge with FLAP. Our project was well received, kind of just conceptually. We walked through the history of the Whitefish Trail, the conservation work that we've worked on over the last 15 years since adoption of the neighborhood plan. I think it went extremely well. It was well received, and I think we were really positioning ourselves with a good, solid application to move forward with next year to help provide some local funding for that project. So just a quick update on that, and I'll keep you apprised as we move through the process, or Maria can as well. On that note, I'm through. Anything further from staff? How about council? Happy 4th. We are adjourned.
Thank you. Wendy, do you have time for a real quick question?